Welcome back. Today is an extraordinary program because we have with us a dear friend and colleague, U.S. chrononaut, time traveler, Mars explorer, a person who we have witness evidence actually that we came to know each other, or at least our artifacts, my book Exopolitics in 1971, which was approximately 30 years before we met face to face, which is called Time Travel Entangled, I think, or Time Entangled. Andrew D. Basiago. Welcome, Andy.
Good to be with you again, my good friend and brother, Alfred Lambremont Webre. Yeah, in fact, I first heard your name in 1971 when I was sitting in a restaurant in Albuquerque, New Mexico with my late father, Raymond F. Basiago, and his lifelong friend, Maria Constancia Chavez of Old Town Albuquerque, Connie Chavez, also known as Pilly Chavez. And my father went into one of those underground locations beneath the surface of New Mexico. New Mexico, of course, being warrened with all kinds of underground bases. And what he did is he retrieved your book, Exopolitics, which you may recall you were kind enough to list me on the title page as the editor of that work. And I contributed the afterword to that work where I listed all the prominent world citizens who have made comments about the alien situation, from Prince Philip to whoever. And my dad handed your book, Exopolitics, which I helped you edit in 2005, across the table, and Connie Chavez paged through the table and said, "Who is Alfred Lambremont Webre?" So I heard your name literally decades before we met in 1999.
Exactly. Now, from the point of view of time science, is that called time travel entangled or time entangled? There's a technical
I think I might characterize it as proto-causation, in the sense that we were destined to meet and become friends and colleagues working on specific projects, but virtually 20 years in the future, and your name was reaching me. So I would think I would put that under the phrase proto-causation.
I see. Well, but that book was the book Exopolitics, which is credited with helping found the science of exopolitics. And our topic today is about, would we call it the infiltration or infestation of the science of exopolitics with non-scientific exohoaxers or falsification of data. Is that how you would characterize it?
Yes, I think that it's clear that ufology, exopolitics, and indeed the entire truth movement has been damaged by, on the one hand, we live in an age of miracles and wonders. There's just phenomenal information being revealed. And there's also phenomenal experiences that people are having. But with that pattern of experience that people are telling the truth about and have directed the truth movement to address, there's also a pattern of contrivance. I even think that there's a number of crises. The first crisis is, and it seems to be building up as we add more and more people to our society. And I love the millennials. I've got some millennial relatives, and they're just remarkable people. And I do notice that there's a very pro-social dimension to most millennials. There's less egotism and more of a desire to help others than, let's say, our baby boom generation had. But at the same time, there seems to be what I'm calling a fictive personality disorder that is afflicting the millennials, in the sense that because of the internet, when they hear about things, they begin to believe that it's true for them as well. And I've caught a number of fairly prominent figures in ufology and exopolitics who are simply making up their stories, and I've known from the beginning that they are. Not all millennials, by the way. A lot are people who have jumped on the bandwagon. So this pattern of contrivance of experience has not been a substitute for experience. It's essentially, well, it's also created a constitutional crisis, not just an epistemological one, in the sense that, you know, the United States government, for example, operates on the basis of official state secrecy. They have been advancing the stories of liars and hoaxers, and they have been denying the truth of not just experiencers, but of people who have worked for them. So even though I've made a lot of exceptional claims in the public realm, I have abided by the truth principle, and I think part of the truth involves identifying lies and liars. And that's what I hope we can do today on this show, just as I did it a number of months ago on a show by our good friend Dr. J. And I can also give you an update on to how I knew those individuals were lying from the get-go. And I can also describe for you what the United States government and the mainstream media that it controls and operates did following that show that I did with Dr. J. I can clearly show to your listeners that they are being actively lied to by the American government, and it is programmed. It is not some accident. It is actually a regime that is in place to lie to the American people. And I consider that a constitutional crisis, so I will keep on discussing the exo-hoaxers until people get a grasp onto really the way in which the truth movement has been diverted by contrivance after contrivance by individuals who have not done what they've claimed. And while those who have done remarkable things for our country have been lied about and that their experiences have been denied, including by the last two presidents of the United States, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, who I plan to include today in today's group of exo-hoaxers. And I can describe what those hoaxes were.
Well, that is going to be quite the show. And I know that you are a preeminent trial attorney. You are admitted to the federal bar.
Right.
In fact, we're both attorneys. I was admitted to the federal bar of Orlando, Florida. So we're actually colleagues. That's to make a disclosure here. And so why don't we start at the beginning as you build your case, counselor, before the bar of public opinion. I should tell the public also that I'll put on my hat as a judge. I've sat on a couple of courts. Of course, these were tribunals of conscience, but I do have that skill. So let justice reign, as they say. Right.
One person I'd like to start with is the same person I started with Dr. J a number of months ago. And I'm very resentful of the legacy of this person. He was basically a nice guy. In fact, I interviewed him, and I had friends who were friends of him, and he had some warm qualities, but he completely confused the discourse about time travel because he was crazy. He was basically mentally ill. And I know he's gone, so I can say that without being confronted by a lawsuit. But Al Bielek, interesting that his name was AB, just as my name is. And by the way, before Al Bielek came forward in 1984, claiming that he had participated in the Philadelphia experiment, the U.S. government already knew that far in the future I would reveal everything about the U.S. time-space program, Project Pegasus, because they had my book. And by the way, I'd like your listeners to know that book is now completed. It's 300 chapters, and it will reveal everything they need to know about what the actual emergence of time travel was like and what it involved in the U.S. defense technical community in the late 60s and early 1970s. But isn't it interesting that Al Bielek shows up in 1984 with his name being AB, just as mine is, with the government knowing that I was going to come forward. But Al Bielek basically told a story in which he claimed he was in the Philadelphia experiment. The problem is that, first of all, when did Al Bielek recover his memories? In my interview with Al Bielek, he stated that he recovered his memories of being in the U.S. time-space program after he saw the Philadelphia experiment at the movie theaters. In other words, he saw a movie and he suddenly remembered that he was in the story. Now, all of the Philadelphia experiment movies and TV shows and books have been disinformation by the U.S. government to conceal the actual U.S. time-space program, which was DARPA's Project Pegasus, the very program that my late father and I served in. And at a high level, in fact, essentially assisting Dr. Harold M. Agnew. So what was the Philadelphia experiment cover story that Bielek relied on? Well, first of all, according to Dr. Robert Beckwith, who I met numerous times when I was serving in Project Pegasus, and who was interviewed a couple of years before he died in 2009, once by Ken Thomas of Steam Shovel Press, once by Alexandra Chica Bruce, and twice by myself. Dr. Robert Beckwith told the same story 35 years later that he would frequently tell when we were serving on Project Pegasus together in the early 70s about the Philadelphia experiment cover story and the real Philadelphia experiment. By the way, Alfred, are you still there?
Yes, I'm listening intently.
Okay, I thought I might have glitched because I heard something on my phone. But anyway, the actual Philadelphia experiment did not involve the Eldridge. It involved the USS Martha's Vineyard. It did not take place in Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. It took place in Long Island Sound. In fact, the actual Philadelphia experiment was the attempt to capture images of the signing of the U.S. Constitution, images that I was shown at a national security watch post in Flemington, New Jersey, when I was serving on Project Pegasus. The ship did not go back to Norfolk, Virginia. When they powered down, it went back to Newport News, Virginia. There were not numerous sailors fused in the ship when it came back to Long Island Sound rather than Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The Martha's Vineyard actually had one sailor who was impaled through the midsection on one of the columns that supported the splash cowling around the captain's mast there on the ship. And importantly, commanding the ship was not Albert Einstein or John von Neumann or Nikola Tesla, because, of course, Tesla died on January 7th of 1943 before this critical experiment was undertaken. Commanding the ship were not any of those people who were often connected to the Philadelphia experiment. They were J. Robert Oppenheimer and Dr. Edward Teller. Now, what the experiment was about was not radar invisibility of the Eldridge. It was Tesla teleportation of the Martha's Vineyard. And because it was such a big, heavy metal object, the ship, that's why the experiment failed and led to that death of that particular sailor. So the reason that we know that Al Bielek was not a voracious claimant, the reason that we know he was essentially inspired by a movie to make up a story about himself, is that he always told the Philadelphia experiment cover story, just as the movie did. Because the movie was what? The movie was official government disinformation. Now, why were they so concerned about disguising the fact that it was about Tesla teleportation rather than radar invisibility, even changing the name of the ship to achieve that disinformational purpose? Because they wanted to delink and conceal the connection between Nikola Tesla, teleportation, and the Los Alamos physicists, people like J. Robert Oppenheimer and Edward Teller. I didn't meet Oppenheimer. I did meet Teller, however, when I was serving on, because of course Oppenheimer was dead already, when I was serving on Pegasus. I met him once. He was controlling he was trying to fix a chronovisor that was at the Los Alamos National Labs, and he was being quite mean, quite insulting. But in essentially taking the plot, the cover story that was advanced in the film, and attributing it to himself, Al Bielek was literally demonstrating that he did not participate in the Philadelphia experiment. He was saying that the event that had been faked, the cover story, was his experience. Another thing he did that we have to be more sort of discerning when people make claims of such an extreme nature, indeed as I have, we have to ask, well, what is he saying that just makes no sense? And one of the things that Al Bielek talked about at great length was that when he jumped off the Eldridge, the very ship that was not involved in this experiment, he reincarnated, and there was that story about the Cameron brothers. Well, there's no connection between Tesla teleportation and reincarnation, except in the sense that when we die and we go back to the Godhead, we go through a tunnel of light, just as when we teleport. So there was that commonality. And indeed, one time when I teleported to New Mexico, I actually got so close to an elderly man who was dying in southern or southwestern Colorado that I saw his life review, and my father and I went up and talked to his widow, because I thought, and I told my dad, I think I'm a reincarnation of that guy that lived up there. And we found from this gentleman's widow that he had just died when I had teleported and seen his life review. So there seems to have been a connection between some teleportation and paranormal effects related to the life review that the recently deceased are going through when somebody is teleporting past their location in time-space. I literally picked up the life review of a man who was dying when I was teleporting to New Mexico. But besides that, there's no inherent connection between teleportation and reincarnation. One is a technical, an advanced technical application involving quantum physics, and another is a spiritual phenomenon that involves our very soul, something far beyond quantum physics. So when Al Bielek merged the subjects of teleportation and reincarnation, everybody in the country should have known that he was a crazy individual making something up. Now, how do I know that he was mentally ill? Well, when I spoke to Al on the phone, and by the way, I spoke to him when he called me. I don't know how he got my phone number. And from the get-go, in the beginning of the conversation, he tried to familiarize himself with me so that I would believe his experiences in light of my own. But I ended up not believing them at all, and I think I've proven that they were false experiences. But he basically called me and suggested that he had really experienced what he experienced, but then he admitted in that very conversation that there was an event where Al Bielek went back to one of his previous employers in his maturity, like in his 50s, and didn't know he had worked there. So imagine anybody in America who would go back to who was an engineer, let's say, who went back to the engineering company that they worked for, and their boss is literally saying to them, Al, you don't remember who I am? You don't remember that I was your supervisor at this company, and you don't remember that you worked for this company? That's what Al Bielek revealed to me in trying to explain his experiences to me. So here's a guy who comes forward in 1984 after he sees the film The Philadelphia Experiment. He goes around the country confusing teleportation for reincarnation. He tells the Philadelphia Experiment cover story, and he's a man who admits that in his maturity, he went back to a company that he had worked at and didn't know he had worked there. So the bottom line is that Al Bielek was a disturbed individual. He was a person with mental problems who saw the Philadelphia Experiment movie and attributed them to himself. That is part of the fictive personality disorder that is now becoming commonplace in my beloved country, America, and that's why I'm speaking out. You know, I used to be able to see, let's say, Jean-Claude Keely skiing when I was a little kid, on ABC Sports or whatever, Wide World of Sports. And I could play around the neighborhood believing that I was skiing when I was playing in the snow, in my home in New Jersey. But I didn't end up believing that I was an Olympic skier like Jean-Claude Keely. But that's what's happening. I'm concerned that this fictive personality disorder that was begun by people like Al Bielek is now becoming literally a mental disorder in the United States of America, because numerous people who have heard my true accounts of time traveling for DARPA's Project Pegasus or going to Mars in a program literally directed by Howard Hughes have listened to my account and that of those who really went. And those who I'm sure really went are my colleagues William Brett Stillings, Bernard Mendez, the late William Whitecrow, and Ken Johnston Sr. I know they went as I did because I had contact with them on the Red Planet. But numerous individuals have come forward and made claims, well, I was a little child when I met you on Mars. And I've had to say, well, hold on. I didn't meet any children on Mars. I met some of the native Martians, and they had children, but I didn't meet any human beings from Earth who were children on Mars. We weren't sending children. The youngest person I met on Mars was William Stillings when he was 14 years old, after being trained the year before at 13 years of age. So I've had numerous people, Alfred, come forward and tell me about their contact with me on Mars, contact that just did not happen. And I've had to ask myself, what is this attributable to? And I frame this idea, and I think it's an idea we really have to take a serious look at, that there is a fictive personality disorder that is besetting at least the American people and probably other countries where the people are spending so much time on the internet that they literally can't tell the difference between what they read on the internet and their own life experiences. But Al Bielek did not participate in Project Pegasus. I would have met him if he had. And his explanation of the Philadelphia experiment is pure fiction because it's a restatement of the disinformation that was intentionally spread by the U.S. government in movies like the Philadelphia experiment to de-link, basically, Tesla, teleportation, and the very Manhattan Project physicists associated with the Los Alamos physics community, people like Dr. Harold Agnew. Agnew participated in every aspect of Project Manhattan, the attempt to build the atomic bomb, and he was the federal science administrator who directed the U.S. time-space program, Project Pegasus. If Bielek had been in the Philadelphia experiment, he would have known that. What he knew was what the movies and the books and the TV shows about the Philadelphia experiment were telling. And then he confused teleportation with reincarnation. So when I spoke with Dr. J a number of months ago, the first ExoHoaxer that I spoke about was Al Bielek. Now, what happened a week later? A week after the show, Fox News did a program not about myself, even though I've given over 500 TV and radio interviews about the U.S. time-space program, Project Pegasus. I've lectured all over the Western Hemisphere, from Kelowna, British Columbia in the north, to Capella del Monte, Argentina in the south, and from Florida in the east to Hawaii in the west. And yet, Fox News did a show about Al Bielek to reify the truth of his time travel experiences exactly 1 week after I talked about the fact that Al Bielek can be determined to be an exohoaxer when I did my first exohoaxer show with Dr. J a number of months ago. Was that an accident? I don't think so. So one of the things that one of the reasons I'm talking about the exohoaxers is I want the American people to understand that the mainstream media works for the U.S. intelligence community. Our source on that is William Colby, a former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who openly admitted by saying, there's nobody of any import in the mainstream media who is not in the CIA's back pocket. That would be all the major journalists in television. That would be why you and I have been lied about right to our faces on American television. In every television show I've done, my experiences in Project Pegasus or Project Mars have been directly lied about. And so I have to ask you, Alfred, could you share that experience you had with Piers Morgan and Jesse Ventura on CNN? Because I was lied about by Jesse Ventura on his show, right to my own face. What happened with you with Piers Morgan and Jesse Ventura?
Oh yeah, that I think was a classic, what we call Operation Mockingbird. Well, the background is that I had been on several segments of Jesse Ventura's television show. I had gone down to New Orleans to be on his segment on the hurricane show, and then I had been on his time travel show. I believe you and I were were both on that. And
Correct.
yeah, and one evening, I turned on CNN, and to my surprise, Piers Morgan, the British TV host, who had come over and taken I'm blocking on his name, the sort of the prime time spot for sort of a late night sort of TV interview. You had Piers Morgan interviewing Governor Jesse Ventura, and all of a sudden they had my picture up on the wall, and they were saying that because during the Jesse Ventura show, I had made the statement based on solid research that Barack Obama, whose original name was Barry Soetoro, whose mother or CIA, CIA babysitter, was in fact a lifelong CIA operative, and I had made those statements in full context on Jesse Ventura's show. And going back to CNN, Piers Morgan had my photograph up on CNN with Jesse Ventura, and Piers Morgan was saying, and who's that jerk who was saying that Barack Obama is a lifelong CIA agent? And Governor Jesse Ventura, who agreed with me during the series, did not jump to my defense. So I was completely vilified in that segment of CNN. Subsequently, I wrote to the president of CNN and requested equal access to make my case, and was denied that. So that was the end of that particular episode.
Right. I cite that incident, not to bring up an unpleasant incident that you had, because I had many on television, and I'd like to just share two or three. Now, I had practiced law as a graduate of Lewis and Clark Law School in Cambridge, where I was the 280th American to take a degree from Magdalen College, Cambridge, since its founding in the year 1428. And I had practiced law ably and well on behalf of the people of the state of Washington, even at reduced fees or no fees when they couldn't afford to pay me for my services. And yet, when my time travel experiences were covered by Matt Markovich on KOMO TV in Seattle, the ABC affiliate in our 12th largest city, he did a fairly fair coverage of my claims, and this is how he ended the show. He said, Basiago is so certain of his time travel experiences that he is either a pathological liar, a sociopath, or the fastest talking science fiction writer on the planet. That was a member of somebody destined for the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington, who had degrees from UCLA and Cambridge, or he was a rare American to have taken a degree from Magdalen College, Cambridge, one of really only several alive at this point, who had served for the Washington State Bar Association ably and well, very ethically, who had been literally a servant of the people of Washington. So I want your listeners to know that these mainstream media journalists will literally attack somebody who's been contributing to the country or to a particular state. I had done both. Because they're working for the government and they're actively involved in concealing things, in creating contrivances, in promoting the claims of hoaxers and besmirching the reputation and the claims of truth tellers who have literally worked for them. So that was the first major insult I got in television. Now, regarding Jesse Ventura, he covered my experiences so well that he went to the house on 20 Grand Canyon Drive in White Rock, California, where I had lived with my father, first in the summer of 1973, and then a summer earlier, in the summer of 72. And the woman who owned the house knew who Dr. Harold Agnew was. She knew what Project Pegasus was. She had contact with the Los Alamos National Labs. And Tyrell Ventura, the son of Governor Jesse Ventura, was so impressed by this woman's confirmation of my experiences that he literally walked off the set of that television show. He was so startled by her confirmation of my connection to Agnew and Project Pegasus. But then when Jesse Ventura was coached by his producer, Michael Braverman, you may recall at the end of that time travel show, he made the completely unfounded and non-contextual, non-historically based claim that I was a victim of government mind control. Why did that happen? That happened because Governor Jesse Ventura is the loyal opposition. What they do is they take somebody and they make them an arch-liberal or an arch-conservative or an independent, and they give them information to make it seem like they're a truth teller. Like in his case, he did those books like on the JFK assassination and so forth. But then on his show, he attacked me. Off the air from his show, he tacitly attacked you by not answering Piers Morgan's totally erroneous claim about you. And then he attacked David Icke, who's done exceptional research. So I'm making this claim on this show. Governor Jesse Ventura is a government agent. He's a former, not a Navy SEAL. He was actually an underwater demolitions expert in the Navy. I'm making the claim on this show, Alfred, that Governor Jesse Ventura is still working for the U.S. Navy. Why do we know that? We know that because the Navy had ambit over time travel, and Jesse Ventura lied to me on his show. It was totally inexcusable. I had offered my services to them for free. There were hundreds of facts that I had given him that they could have checked. His own son, as I said, as I was describing, walked off the set when it was demonstrated to the whole group that we were then filming with that I was telling the truth. That's how startled Tyrell was. And, of course, he became a pretty honest journalist at that. I have great faith in Tyrell, but not in his father. Jesse Ventura lied about me. There was no basis for what he said, and I think on that basis it's easy for us to conclude that when he was running as an independent in Minnesota and when he was doing his show Conspiracy Theory, Jesse Ventura has been working for the Office of Naval Intelligence, for the Navy, because there was no reason for him to lie about me. The fact that I really had time traveled for the government had already been demonstrated on his own show. Go back to that show. They show the scene in White Rock where I find the house my dad and I lived in, and the woman who's living there had heard of Harold Agnew, and she had heard of Project Pegasus, and she didn't doubt me when I told her that we had lived there in the summer of 73 and then in the summer of 72, a year later, because we were moving around in time in Project Pegasus. Jesse Ventura, there was no need, and it was really against his interest as a broadcaster to make it seem like I was a victim of mind control rather than an actual chrononaut for our country. But that's what he did. So these are the types of things that are happening with the mainstream media. The people of the United States need to know that they are promoting exo-hoaxers and liars like Al Bielek, and the people who literally risk their lives serving the country are being lied about to make it seem, or not even covered, to make it seem like, because they don't want the people to know the truth about what our government is doing. I think this is a constitutional crisis, and that's why I wanted to extend this information about the exo-hoaxers by, continuing the theme that I started on Dr. J's show and explain why I knew in each of these cases that these people were exo-hoaxers from the beginning. But Al Bielek is certainly one of them. And if Jesse Ventura had interviewed Al Bielek, it would have been appropriate for Jesse to say, I don't think that Al Bielek is a chrononaut like he claims. I believe that he's a mentally ill person who made up his belief system. That would have been accurate, but that's not the case with me. My father and I actually served in the program. My dad was an expert on teleportation and chronovision because he had repeated Tesla's experiments at the Thomas A. Edison Research Labs, where he was employed between 1956 and 64. And in my book, I give the hundreds of facts that after 50 years I remember from Project Pegasus. So the truth will not be defeated. The truth will win. But before we win, the people need to know that their government is actively lying to them. It's their government that's placing liars in the mainstream media. You use a good connection there when you reference Project Mockingbird. That is the intel community that actively advances state secrecy by having mainstream journalists, mainstream media presenters make things up. And so what happens a week after I talk about Al Bielek on my last ExoHoaxer show? Fox News does a story reifying the believability of Al Bielek. It's absurd. They've never even contacted me, and yet I've lectured all over the hemisphere. You know, my last lecture in Argentina reached La Vanguardia in Spain and the leading newspaper in Argentina, La Voz. Did it reach any American papers? No. Why? Because mainstream journalists in this country are working for the U.S. government. I know that as somebody who worked for the UCLA Daily Bruin in college, because I once walked into the Daily Bruin and somebody had scratched on one of the desks, CIA for cash. And when I called that number, it was a prominent Italian-American lawyer in Santa Monica. And I believe members of the UCLA Daily Bruin, a newspaper staff, the third largest daily in Los Angeles at that time after the LA Times and the Los Angeles Herald Examiner, the college journalists on the UCLA Daily Bruin, that some of them were on the take from the CIA. Because when I showed somebody that thing that had been scratched on the desk, they quickly got some Ajax and removed it and didn't even say anything to me. Why? Because their MO had been revealed. Some of the Bruins that I wrote on the Daily Bruin with were on CIA payroll as college students. What does that mean about the Dan Rathers, the Peter Jennings, and the Tom Brokaws? Okay? Well, all we need is what William Colby said. There's nobody of any renown in mainstream journalism who was not in our back pocket. Who was our that he was talking about? His agency, the CIA. So wake up, America. Mainstream media is bullshit. Whether it's liberal bullshit like CNN or it's conservative bullshit like Fox News, they are working for the government. They are not to be trusted. So anyway, if you doubt that, look up the show I did with Dr. J called the ExoHoaxers. It was about 6 to 9 months ago. And then see what Fox News did a week later by reifying the story of a proven liar, Al Bielek. And yet they have never called me, even though I have lectured over the entire scope of the Western Hemisphere. I have gotten no calls about my time travel experiences from any mainstream media station, and all I got from ABC was that hideous thing that Matt Markovich said about me at the end of his show, you know, that I was either a pathological liar, a sociopath, or the fastest thinking science fiction writer on the planet. He then claimed in a later show that I made up my account because of things I saw on the TV show Fringe, but if he had interviewed me about that, I would have told him the truth, which is I was interviewed by ABC Disney in January of 2008, and things that I talked about during that interview by ABC Disney at the offices of Vin DeBona in Los Angeles, the very producer of Entertainment Tonight and other major TV shows. It was for consideration of my experiences as a contemporary TV drama like Fringe or 24, The X-Files, and they took that information, and then there were writers for Fringe who were in that meeting who then dropped my experiences into Fringe. So it wasn't a matter about me being inspired by Fringe to make up my time travel claim. I gave ABC Disney the truth about my time travel experiences, and then ABC Disney then helped drop that information into Fringe, and then an ABC affiliate, KOMO TV in Seattle, then defamed me as a distinguished lawyer in their state by claiming that I had been inspired by Fringe, when in fact Fringe had stolen from me. So television is crooked. Turn off the television. Turn on the internet. Turn on radio. Most of the treatment I've gotten from American radio broadcasters, large and small in terms of their audience share, from people who get 100 on a podcast to George Norrie on Coast to Coast AM. Most of the treatment I've gotten on radio, and including your own shows, Alfred, has been completely fair. But television is completely corrupt. Do not listen to it anymore. Do not listen to any of the mainstream news programs on television. They are all working for the U.S. government.
Right. So you're making what you're doing really, to go back to the opening of the show, is that you are coming here to make sure that your evidence about the quantum access programs and the evidence that you are bringing forward is not contaminated by all of these false attempts.
By people like Al Bielek. And I'd urge the listeners to who I am. I have 5 degrees, including degrees from UCLA and Cambridge. I mentioned how I was the 280th American to take a degree from Magdalen College, Cambridge, University of Cambridge, since it was founded in the year 1428. When I left UCLA as an undergraduate, who was my first employer? Captain Jacques Cousteau. In fact, I was offered at age 25 the opportunity to ghostwrite for Captain Cousteau, or Gique, as they called him. At the same time, there in 1986, when I was 25 years old, I began a 3-year internship with Norman Cousins. Well, who was Norman Cousins? Norman worked for 3 American presidents, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. He was, for 40 years, the editor of the Saturday Review, which began as the Saturday Review of Literature and then just became the Saturday Review. Along with The Nation and The New Republic, that Carey McWilliams and Gilbert Harrison edited, the Saturday Review was a 600,000 circulation a week magazine that was one of the leading public intellectual magazines in American history. Norman recommended me to be the editor of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, the major magazine to ban the bomb, because that's what he worked on his whole career, was ending the threat of nuclear incineration, when I was 26 years old. He even urged me to drop out of law school to become the editor of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. I then went on, after all my degrees and passing of the bar, to practice law faithfully and well in the state of Washington for almost 25 years, reaching the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington with no sponsorship. If you study the law, you'll find that most people who reach the U.S. District Courts go through either a prominent law firm or prosecutor's office. I got there as a lawyer in solo practice without even a secretary working for me, okay? And I've done now about 500 shows about my experiences. I'm speaking out against the exo-hoaxers because the U.S. government is in the business of lying about truth tellers and promoting liars. That's not what America is supposed to be about. I consider this a constitutional crisis.
Right.
And Al Bielek on time travel is a classic example. Here's a man who admitted at the federal level in the state of Washington, when I was in the state of Washington practicing law at the time, that he had only remembered his experiences about time travel after seeing the movie, The Philadelphia Experiment. And then he told me the stories about how he went back to a former employer and didn't know he had worked there. And also, Alfred, I want to ask you about your experience with Al Bielek. Weren't you at a conference one time and you met Al Bielek and he made some admission that he was mentally ill? Do you remember that story?
I've never met him.
Well, I remember there was a story that somebody told me that they were at a conference and Al Bielek was in the center of a group of people who were in rapt attention because he was the big time travel guy at that time, basically recasting the Philadelphia Experiment movie as his own experience. And he said something that would later damage me, because it's been claimed about me by no less than Jesse Ventura. He said, everybody who's making their time travel claims is a victim of mind control by the government. And some of them are mental patients who have been mind controlled by the government. And somebody said, is that the case with you, Al? And he smiled at the person and said, yes. So,
Yeah.
Bielek letter.
Right. Yeah. So these are obviously this is a contamination of the exopolitical evidence which you're bringing forward, establishing the U.S. secret quantum access time-space program. Now, you had 3 other exohoaxers before even getting to the exohoaxers commanders-in-chief, Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Do you want to segue away from Al Bielek to these other 3 and then to Barack Obama and Donald Trump?
Yes, certainly to the extent that I hope everybody now knows that AB, as in Andrew Basiago, actually time traveled, but AB, as in Al Bielek, didn't. And that individual, in a specific area of his claims, we can completely discredit Zechariah Sitchin. Now, first let me share what I didn't share on Dr. J's show, and why I knew from the get-go that Zechariah Sitchin's material is not to be believed. First of all, I am a contactee. My father worked on the ramjet, which was to chase the alien craft out of our solar system, or excuse me, out of our atmosphere and the near-Earth environment. He was called to Curtiss Wright in October of 1952 to work on the metal alloy by which the ramjet would be built. So my dad was basically working for the Defense Department in the response to the ET presence beginning in 1952, just a year after he graduated from Lehigh. And I don't know if it was linked to my father's work, because I was born 9 years later in 1961 when he started working on our counterforce to the ET presence. But I had extensive ET contact in childhood. It occurred sometimes during the day, but primarily they were nocturnal contacts. They were, the ones I had in my home in New Jersey were exclusively the small grays, except for one who was one of the oranges. And the only other person I know who had contact with the oranges was the broadcaster Clyde Lewis, who was, I think, about a year and a half younger than I. But anyway, throughout my childhood, I was having contacts with the small grays. And I was interviewed about those contacts in kindergarten. Kindergarten for me was 1966-67. And in the spring of 1967, 4 or 5 kids were pulled out of my my kindergarten class, Mrs. Walski's class. And I noticed later how they were all kids with fathers that were working for defense contractors like mine was. And 40 years later, in around 2007, I was able to identify the younger of those 2 FBI agents who interviewed me about my contacts with the small grays. His name was Richard Bauer Sr. I was contacted by his son, Richie Bauer, also known as Richard Bauer Sr. of Malibu, California. And Richie ended up sending me a picture of his late father. I said, that's it. That's the guy who interviewed me. And just to prove that I had met him, I said, I bet you remember the fact that your father had this habit of tilting his chair back on the way he tilted it back on a chalk ledge in the room where he interviewed me. And he said, yeah, my dad did that so much he would even do it while eating dinner at our home. He would tilt his chair back and eat his dinner. And I said, I know. We were all told how dangerous that was, you know, to sit at a chair while tilting back like that. So anyway, I was able, in other words, to go back and get the name, the identity of one of the 2 FBI agents who interviewed me in spring of 1967. They would show me normal pictures like a little French boy in a beret, and then they would pull something over the picture and it would be a gray ET in some kind of position. And then they would ask me how I felt about that picture. And the older FBI agent looked at, when I told him I felt good about the picture because they were nice to me when they visited me at night, the older FBI agent, who kind of reminded me of Jackie Gleason, looked at Richard Bauer Sr. and said, I told you some of the kids were going to say things like to us like this. Because what did I learn from his son, Richard Bauer Jr., but that his father had just transferred from the Office of Naval Intelligence to the FBI to work on the alien situation. So that was the first exposure I had to the Intel's community, the Intel community's response to the ET presence on our planet, the ET situation. And it was about my contacts with the small grays. Then in the fourth grade, which for me was 1970-71, I had a special lecture in which I was told that 70 different ET species were known to have visited our planet or were visiting it, but 4 were known to be visiting it frequently. They were the tall grays, the small grays, the amphibians, also presumably the reptilians, and the Nordics. Okay. Now that was in the early 1970s. Who was told that in the early 1980s? None other than Honorable Paul T. Hellyer, the defense minister for all of Canada. So in those 10 years, from like 70, 71 to 81, 82, when Paul Hellyer then became defense minister of Canada, that information in that ET briefing went from a small child in New Jersey who was time traveling for the country, who had revealed his ET contact experiences to 2 FBI agents in spring of 1967, had now reached the briefing of the defense minister of Canada. Now, the next year, in 71, 72, I took part in Yellow Book lessons that were at the ESO Night School in Convent Station, New Jersey. They were taught by a graduate mathematics student at Rutgers University with the last name of Cunningham, which I found interesting, and I remembered because there was a Cunningham family that lived across the street from me in Morris Plains, New Jersey. And I knew their sons, Norman and Randy Cunningham. So I knew the parents, Bob and Evelyn Cunningham, so I never forgot the name of that guy who gave us the Yellow Book lessons in Convent Station at the ESO Night School. In that lecture, he said, I know you kids have had, some of you have had contact with the small grays. I think it's important for all of you kids to know that when we had the solar system catastrophe of 9500 BC, we didn't really get back on our feet as a civilization for 6,000 years later in ancient Sumer. And it was somewhere between 3000 and 3500 BC that a particular group of ETs helped us kickstart human civilization on Earth. And that was none other than the ones that many of you have had contact with and that you can expect to have contact with for the remainder of your lives, the small grays. So because I had been told that by the U.S. Department of Defense, and it was framed relative to the FBI's knowledge of my contact with the small grays throughout earliest childhood, from about birth to age 12, even after I took the Yellow Book lessons, the claims of Zechariah Sitchin about the so-called Anunnaki could not have been true unless the Anunnaki were the small grays. In other words, the Anunnaki did not kickstart our civilization. The small grays did. And they were continuing to improve our civilization by abducting particular individuals. And just as John Mack described, for example, the emphasis of what I got from the small grays, I mean, I went on to earn 3 advanced degrees in environmental affairs. So John Mack's claim about how some of the small grays were trying to, some of the ETs were trying to make us sort of more ecotopian philosophers, like be better to our planet, was without question on the right track. I know that a major emphasis of my ET contact experiences was to care about this planet. But in any case, I knew that Zechariah Sitchin was making up his story because he was claiming that the Anunnaki kickstarted civilization, and it wasn't. It was the small grays. Millions of human beings have had contact with the small grays. It's commonplace. I've talked to probably about 1,000 people at different conferences and over the phone. They've been on the radio and so forth. Contact with the small grays has become commonplace on our planet. So now, why did you detect that Zechariah Sitchin was? What else can we say about Zechariah Sitchin in terms of the fact that he was making up his claims about the Anunnaki?
Well, yes, I became friendly with a couple who live here who at that time lived here in Vancouver, who were the owners of the publishing company that published Zechariah Sitchin's books. And they became suspicious of his scholarship. So what they told me was that they took his materials and submitted them to a Sumerian expert. And what the expert came back with, this is what was reported to me by the publishers. They submitted it to a Sumerian expert who stated that that the so-called Sumerian tablets that Zechariah Sitchin that his translations and his assertions of Sumerian civilization and materials were false and were fabricated. They were fabrications. And
Right.
and one additional fact. They stated, and I just want to state this fact because I haven't worked it out completely, that Zechariah Sitchin was at the Pentagon at the time of the U.S. illegal under international law invasion of Iraq. And I say illegal because later I was one of the judges on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal that found that the U.S. invasion of Iraq under President George W. Bush, Vice President Richard B. Cheney, and Secretary of Defense Donald H. Rumsfeld and their attorneys was a war crime, and involved crimes against humanity. And so it was illegal, and they stated that Zechariah Sitchin was at the Pentagon and was an advisor to the Pentagon at the time. So I don't want to embellish what was told to me, but I'm just passing on those facts.
Right. What I heard was that Zechariah Sitchin was a science fiction writer from Israel who moved to New York City in the early 50s. He did not speak ancient Sumerian. The tablets that he advanced as being the source of his claims about the Anunnaki were not in existence. In other words, he would make claims of a certain tablet making a certain statement in ancient Sumerian, but he not only didn't know how to read and write Sumerian, but the tablets didn't exist. So Zechariah Sitchin was an exo-hoaxer per se. Now, I'm not expert enough on Middle Eastern politics to know whether he was working for the Mossad and promoting the war against Iraq through his work, but I do know that it was pretty extensively covered and then kind of abandoned as an issue, that when American forces invaded Iraq, they went down to the Baghdad Museum to look for stone tablets at the insistence of none other than Zechariah Sitchin. And in that sense, Sitchin promoted Israel's war against Iraq using the United States as a proxy by even advancing his claims about those tablets, that we wanted to get a hold of them because they might can include like a Sumerian information about time travel, for example, so that it was strategically important to invade Iraq to capture those tablets. So we know at least that Sitchin was the author of the interest in such tablets or the chief promoter of such interest, and that he was in the Pentagon during the invasion. So we have to be not just smart, but wise and realize that, look, somebody who does not know a language cannot write about what was written in it with authority without using fiction. I'm sorry, it's just not possible. And unless they've experienced something. And certainly Zechariah Sitchin wasn't talking about experience he had in a past life in ancient Sumer. So this is an excellent example of an exo-hoaxer because this exo-hoax fooled some very brilliant people. I mean, I consider Dr. Sasha Lessin one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. He was awarded his PhD in anthropology from a great university, my own alma mater of UCLA, and I know you have to be quite bright to earn a PhD from that school. And those who were chairing his degree committee when he was awarded that PhD in anthro were none other than Margaret Mead and her husband Gregory Bateson, two of the leading anthropologists on the planet at that time. So because of the fraud by Zechariah Sitchin, Sasha and his lovely wife Janet were bamboozled into writing a number of very fascinating books about, based on the ultimate idea of the Anunnaki by Zechariah Sitchin, but they were never alerted to the fact that Zechariah Sitchin was a fiction writer, the very thing that Matt Markovich accused me of being when I appeared on KOMO TV in Seattle, but I was telling the truth. So we have a situation here where science fiction writers are being elevated into demigods of social science and science, like Zechariah Sitchin, but people telling the truth, whose work can only form the basis for valid science and social science in the future, are being lied about by our own government, which was, and the United States was supposed to be the flowering of the Enlightenment. God help us. But anyway, so the second one, yes, was Zechariah Sitchin. And I just wanted to emphasize that when I originally spoke to Dr. J about Zechariah Sitchin being one of the leading exo-hoaxers, I wanted to emphasize the point that I knew when I first heard about the Anunnaki kickstarting our civilization in ancient Sumer, that the Defense Department of the United States itself had already briefed me as a contactee that it was the small grays. So how could it be? And then when I would ask individuals presenting about Zechariah Sitchin's work and the Anunnaki and everything, I would say, what is an Anunnaki? Is it a small gray, a tall gray, a reptilian, a Nordic? Are they like us? Are they us? Nobody advancing the idea of the Anunnaki could ever give me an answer. And how was that? They were supposed to have kickstarted the human civilization on Earth in ancient Sumer. Don't they know what they are? Nobody advancing the idea of who the Anunnaki are or was ever able to say what they were. And that's not scientific. I mean, if somebody's describing, a certain kind of animal, they're describing it as that kind of animal. So how could they talk about the Anunnaki and not be able to identify what kind of humanoid it was? But that's a huge hole in the donut of the Anunnaki legend that Zechariah Sitchin started as a science fiction writer, possibly promoting Israel's interests for the Mossad.
Right. Now, there was a third exo-hoaxer that you...
Yeah, and I want to be kind to this person because I think this person has some ability. And that is the con man from Fresno, California, known as Ralph Angerman. But I'm sure those in the exopolitical community know him by his chosen name, Alex Collier, which is certainly a nice name to select. Now, it's legal to select as Muhammad Ali, the former Cassius Clay, loved to comment, and Howard Cosell, he used to always mention it. It's legal in America to change your name if you wish to, as long as it's not to avoid some criminal conviction or charge. But I think it's important to know that Alex Collier was born Ralph Angerman and that he served time in federal prison for pretending that he was a CPA, a certified public accountant, and completing Americans' federal tax returns. After leaving prison, presumably after serving his debt to society, Ralph Angerman changed his name to Alex Collier. And the only thing I challenge about Alex's work is something that I'm sure is not known and cannot be known. Now, first of all, let me say my information about Ralph Angerman, the person using the name Alex Collier, was given to me by his ex-wife, Liberty, when I spoke at the Swedenborgian Church of San Diego in 2012 under the kind aegis of the Reverend Carla Augusta Friedrich. And Liberty came up to me and kind of filled me in about the real Alex Collier. Now, the reason that I include Alex Collier in the ExoHoaxers is not because he served time in prison for fraud, not because he changed his name from Ralph Angerman to Alex Collier. That was certainly legal. But because he has always insisted in his lectures that he knows where particular extraterrestrial species are from. I know that the U.S. government has no information, has no understanding of what the ETs are, where they're from, or what they want. We don't even know if they're from outer space per se. They could be from this area of space and they're just dropping down from a higher dimension. That's been theorized. Now, why do I know that? Because when I was serving in Project Pegasus, there were several tall grays who met with me and several of the other children in the program. When I left that meeting, which was held in the Manzano weapons storage area below Albuquerque, I was reconnected with my father, who was in New Mexico at that time, both of us having teleported there from Curtis Wright in Woodridge, New Jersey. And I said, Dad, why are they interested in me? And I didn't mean the two tall grays I had just met underneath Albuquerque in that arranged meeting, but he thought that's who I was talking about. And he said, they wanted to meet some of the children of our project people, by which my dad was basically admitting to me that a dimension or an aspect of Project Pegasus was achieved in liaison with the tall grays. I've never emphasized that because three principals on Project Pegasus, my father, Jack Pruitt, and Dr. Robert Beckwith, emphasized the debt of gratitude that Project Pegasus owed Nikola Tesla. So I've always emphasized that because that was the principal contribution, was from a fellow human being. But there was ET liaison with the tall grays going on in the context of Project Pegasus. But what my dad didn't understand is I wasn't talking about the two tall grays I had just had a meeting with in the weapons, the Manzano weapons storage area beneath Albuquerque. I was talking about the small grays who were visiting me frequently in my bedroom and around different areas around my house in Morris Plains, New Jersey. And I said, well, who are they, Dad? And he said, nobody knows. We don't know who they are, what they are, where they're from, or what they want. Okay, so this is what the American people need to know. Our government has been in ET liaison with specific ET species that it doesn't know what they are, or who they are, where they're from, or what they want. But it has been in liaison with such species. Now, that means we need to be a little bit more circumspect when an ex-con from Fresno, California, Alex Collier, comes forward and says, well, this one is from Lyra, and this one is from the Andromeda Galaxy, and these are from the Pleiades, and so forth. What I'm saying is, I learned from somebody literally working on one of the most sensitive and secret defense projects in the history of our country, that our government was working with the tall grays, but didn't know who they were, what they wanted, or where they were from. Okay? So think about why the government would have, let's say, promoted the claims of individuals like Alex Collier. I'm not alleging that Alex was put forward on the speaking circuit by the government. I'm just saying that his pattern of acting like you can say where the ETs are from has been an increasingly common part of ufology and exopolitics. I'm saying the government doesn't know. I'm saying the actual evidence of people who have served in classified defense projects reveals that we don't know where they're from. I've even had claims that some of the people associated with Project Mars were seen to have shapeshifted into ETs. Okay? I haven't gone forward with that information yet because I'm certain that a number of people I went to Mars with were human beings from Earth, like I am. But I have had some interesting information that has been reported to me lately that suggests that even some of the astronauts who went to Mars in Project Mars under Howard Hughes were ETs who were able to shapeshift into human form. And I've taken an increasing number of stories from both broadcasters and just individuals from around the country who have witnessed people shapeshifting into something else. Okay, so my point here is that because the U.S. government doesn't know what the ETs are, where they're from, and what they want, they have put people into exopolitics to make it seem like we know where they're from, and we don't. What is that? Why is that being done with people like Alex Collier? It's being done, not saying it's being done with Alex Collier, but people like him are being put into exopolitics to simply assuage the fears and anxieties of the American population if they were told the truth. Look, everybody, we're in liaison with some of these ETs, but we don't know where they're from, what they want, or who they are. Okay? It's basically that Brookings Institution kind of reasoning that since the people would panic if they were told the truth, do not tell them the truth. And I would just like to earmark that subject for our fifth and sixth exo-hoaxers, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, because that's why I think they've lied about Mars. But anyway, my chief complaint about Alex Collier is it is simply not true that we know where the ETs are from. We don't even know that they're from outside our solar system, much less outside our galaxy. And we don't know, they could be in another dimension where they use the device that they're flying in to slip down into our dimension while co-occupying this area of space, but another area of time. In other words, they may be in our sky 10,000 years from now, or maybe they were here 10,000 years ago, and they're using time travel to drop into this dimension of time-space. That's possible because, as I said, the Defense Department, as of 40 years ago, had no idea where the ETs are from, and I have seen nothing credible to suggest that they found out. There's been no announcement. There's been no secret information that's been brought forward by Defense Department experiencers. So I believe what my father told me over 40 years ago, almost 50 years ago, is still true, and that is we don't know where the ETs are from. And look at how, because he was such a brilliant speaker, Alex Collier's claims that we could identify precisely where the ETs were from in specific cases, look at how it was believed. And I have to ask, how did he find that out? If ET visitation to Earth is so secret that the U.S. government is subjecting those who claim contact with extraterrestrials to public smear campaigns involving fear and ridicule, as suggested or implied by the Durant report of the CIA Robertson Committee panel of 1952-53, where did Alex Collier find out where they're from? And does he ever say in any of his lectures how he found out where they're from, or does he just talk about where they're from? So after speaking with Liberty, his ex-wife, and finding out about the real Alex Collier, I concluded that his presentation was basically about alleging something that right now can't be proved by civilians. It may be known by some military people and intel people who've been let in to our most advanced information gathered by the government. There may be theories that are of greater or lesser strength as arguments, but I do not believe the U.S. government has ever proven where specific ET species are from, and I know that they've been in liaison with our Department of Defense because I witnessed it as a child.
Now, the fourth individual that you've been speaking that you want to address is a person that's been making allegations about a place that you've actually visited, and that's the planet of Mars. Do you want to
Right.
do you want to mention him?
Yes, I want the audience to know that I have proven, and I don't enjoy this because I want it if you read my paper corroborating Captain Cramer, you'll see that I originally was hoping so earnestly that Randy Cramer was telling the truth, because part of my truth campaign was bringing forward not just other experiencers of similar programs, but individuals who I'd actually served with. And even though I spent only 4 years on Mars, in 1981, 2, 3, and 4, I brought forward 4 other experiencers from the very program I served in. William Brett Stillings, Bernard Mendez, the late William Whitecrow, whose original name was William Paris, and Ralph Kennedy Johnston Sr., Ken Johnston. And by the way, recently Ken Johnston Sr. has given me a document with the autographs and personal commendations to him from 58 American astronauts. And I will be bringing that document forward in my book about my experiences in Project Mars, which numbers 150 chapters, and like my 300-chapter book on Project Pegasus, is completed. It too just has to be edited. But after serving just 4 years on Mars, I brought forward 4 individuals that I was on the surface with. Now, in 2013, 4 years after I started coming forward publicly, I came forward on Mars in 2009 at the Science and Spirituality conference of James Gilliland at his sanctuary in Trout Lake, Washington. And I believe you were there, Alfred.
Yes.
And at that time, I only remembered my first 2 acclimational trips to Mars, and those are the only ones I talked about. Just like when I starred on that pilot that Bill and Carrie at Project Camelot did on True TV, Shadow Operations. At that time in my life, I was just remembering the first 2 trips, and then I began to remember more and more. Because I was amnestic about my Mars experiences for 25 years. Now, why was that true of myself and Brett, Bernie, William, and Ken? Because they were using a device on us called the LIDA machine. It was originally a Soviet device, and they were using that to erase our memories. So it was really a miracle that those 5 individuals came forward on Mars. And I must add that we have William Brett Stillings to thank for that, because when he contacted me, that kind of set off that concatenation of events that allowed those 5 gentlemen to come forward and talk about having contact with each other on Mars. Now, and that's certainly highly corroborative. Now, when Randy Cramer came forward 4 years later in 2013, he stated that he had spent 17 years on Mars. Now, why did I suspect that he was making up his account right away? Why did I sense he was an exo-hoaxer right away? The reason was that when we were going to Mars, there were only 2 classes of those going. There were lifers, who were imprisoned individuals in military jails, military prisons, who were being allowed to live out their natural life on Mars, or they could remain in a thing called a prison cell, which is actually just a cage, right? Or they could decide to stay on Earth and live out their natural lives caged up in prison cells. And a number of individuals agreed to be lifers on Mars, where they could go up, be provided or make a house up there, and just stay there. Many of those were killed by predators, as were some of the short-timers. Those who were going up for minutes, hours, and at most like a day, usually trying to get home before nightfall, and that was the group that I was in, and that Stillings, Mendez, Whitecrow, and Johnston were in. We were known as VIPs because we had that was just a nickname, because we had the right to, we weren't very important persons. We just had the right to go back quickly and not have to spend a lifetime on Mars. We could just spend a short period of time. Now, interestingly, there were 3 individuals who would run for president and 1 who would become the president of a major presidentially founded organization going. Among the presidential candidates who were in the Mars program as VIPs, in addition to myself, there was Barack Hussein Obama, then using the name Barry Soetoro, as you mentioned, and H. Ross Perot. H. Ross Perot was one of the Mars astronauts. H. Ross Perot Sr., the one who ran for president under the Reform Party in 1992. Another presidential level astronaut going to Mars was Mary Jean Eisenhower, the aunt of our great friend Laura Eisenhower. So those four individuals have been talked about for the presidency, in addition to myself. I ran in 2016. So three gentlemen who have run for the U.S. presidency were going, and a woman who could very well be president of the United States, Mary Jean Eisenhower, and a great one at that, who for many years led the People-to-People Ambassadors program that President Eisenhower founded when she was like a year old. It was founded in 1956, and Mary Jean was born in 1955. I met Mary Jean Eisenhower once. Now let's just contextualize my experiences with those of Randy Cramer. I was, as I mentioned, I was going up there for 4 years, 1981, 2, 3, and 4. And yet I brought forward 4 people who I was on the surface with. I brought them forward to admit that they went, and that was Stillings, Mendez, Whitecrow, and Johnston. But I named numerous Americans who were on Mars. I've named 17 Americans who were on Mars, individuals who never came forward, like my father, Raymond F. Basiago, like Courtney Maurice Hunt of the CIA, like Mary Jean Eisenhower, like Barack Hussein Obama, like Regina Elvira Dugan. I have released the names of 17 Americans who I was on the surface of Mars with, even though I was going for 4 years, but Randy Cramer was unable to name a single comrade that he was on the surface of the red planet with, even though he had been there for 17 years. What we have to do to avoid exo-hoaxing is contextualize what people are saying. We have to be discerning about the implications of what they're saying. Randy Cramer from the get-go was talking about being on Mars for 17 years, but not naming a single comrade. Just as Corey Good was mentioning how he did 20 years and back once, and then a second time, and then a third time, and he never mentioned any of the people he spent any time in space with. He didn't bring any of them forward, even though he had spent a combined 60 years in space. Okay? So I knew from the beginning that Randy Cramer was making up his story. Why else did I know that? I knew that because he was stating from the time of his first interview with Dr. Michael Salla in 2013, that really lengthy one he did, that kind of kicked off his storytelling about Mars and going there, or supposedly going there, that he had had contact with 2 predators. One was a reptoid and one was an insectivoid, and they were bipedal, 2-legged. Well, I and the other gentleman who actually went to Mars were talking about the 2 inevitably lethal predators. One was about 16 feet tall. We were calling it a reptoid, and it was sort of like a big Tyrannosaurus Rex, but its face looked a little bit more like a chicken than a T-Rex head and face, especially from the side. I watched one of my fellow astronauts literally being torn in half by that predator. But was it bipedal? No. It had 2 legs and 2 arms, just like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The 5 of us, Basiago, Stillings, Mendez, Whitecrow, and Johnston, also talked about the other inevitably lethal predator, the insectivoid. The insectivoid was about the size of a small garbage truck and had about 6 to 10 legs that varied based on the age of the creature. And it was shaped sort of like a grasshopper, and unfortunately, unlike a grasshopper, it had 2 jagged teeth coming from its skull that could shred somebody if it got anywhere near a human being, one of our astronauts. We actually received a special lecture about these 2 predators from Major Ed Dames, the person who was giving us our Mars training at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, in August and September of 1980. We were given lectures about many of the creatures on Mars. Now, we also talked about bipedal humanoids. There are 5 species of bipedal humanoids on Mars, the 2 primary ones being the Homo martis terris, which means Earthman on Mars. They're the descendants of the human beings that were going up there in antiquity, and then the Homo Martis Martis, the Martian men of Mars, who were the indigenous Martians who were there when we got there during the High Egyptian civilization. A High Egyptian connection, by the way, which our late great friend Ross Curley proved by finding the face of an Egyptian, of a pharaoh, with the conical headdress and the Wadjet cobra ready to strike motif on the front of the headdress. That was found on Mars by Ross Curley of the Mars Anomaly Research Society. So the High Egyptian connection to Mars has been established forensically, with evidence. That's what I want to make clear to your audience that's primarily an exopolitical audience, which is some of these connections have been proven by groups like MARS, the Mars Anomaly Research Society, of which I'm the president and Alfred is the chairman of the board of advisors and always has been, at great cost to both of us. The High Egyptian civilization was going to Mars. Now, so the reason I knew that Randy Cramer was not to be believed when I first heard his account as given to Dr. Michael Salla in 2013 was there were no bipedal predators. One had 4 legs and one had multiple appendages. And he was confusing that reptoid and insectivoid predators with the bipedal humanoids who were on Mars. So I just started to add up what he was saying, and so when I started to interview him on stage in 2017, we were at the first annual UFO conference and paranormal symposium that Jane Cameron and Preston Collins sponsored in Yelm, Washington. And I asked Randy a number of slow-pitch questions. And then I asked him, I said, Randy, you were on Mars for 17 years. Could you give us the name of any comrade of yours on the Red Planet during those 17 years? And he looked at me like a deer caught in the headlights. And even though he'd been interviewed by Dr. Michael Salla only 4 years earlier, he could not tell me that the name of the wife that he met and fell in love with on Mars, he had told Dr. Salla was Deirdre. Instead, he couldn't name anybody he had served on Mars with, including his late wife, who supposedly died in this horrific predator attack on the Martian surface. I then waited a couple of years, and this year, I was on Martian Revelation with Gary Legier. He uses the nickname Mad Martian. And I asked Randy Cramer for the name of his wife on Mars, and instead of saying, as he had only 7 years ago in 2013, that her name was Deirdre, he quickly snapped and told me that the name of his wife on Mars was Doris. Well, look, common sense dictates that any married man is not going to forget the name of one of his wives. I mean, men can have multiple wives in a given lifetime. In fact, that's becoming increasingly common to change partners during the course of the lifetime. But love is such a key part of human life. I think it's clearly one of the reasons we're here, if not the major reason we're here. And marriage is such a fundamental institution that no man who is sane and of ordinary intelligence is going to forget the name of his wife. And the particular wife who forgot her name and gave a different name was one who supposedly died in his arms on another planet. I'm sorry. I believe that Randy Cramer's fraud has already been proven. Now, why by 2017 did I suspect that in fact was the case, and that why I confronted him in 2020 and asked him for the name of his wife on Mars? And it actually ended up being helpful because it showed that he didn't remember what he had told when he made up his story and told Dr. Salla. I interviewed his former wife, Andrea, in 2017, and she briefed me on the fact that he had made up everything. He heard my account and that of William Stillings and Bernard Mendez and William Whitecrow and Ken Johnston, and he made up his story. Now, I'm not making that up. That's my testimony about what his ex-wife, Andrea, said. In fact, she told me she divorced him because he was making things up. One time, for example, they came out of a building and they couldn't find their car, and he tried to insist that they had been teleported and therefore couldn't find their car. And believe you me, in my experience, when you walk out of a building and can't find your car, it's because you can't find your car, not because you've teleported. So Randy Cramer has engaged in the invention of a story that is almost unprecedented in American culture. And why do I say that? I say that because he was feted, when he brought his Mars story forward, he was feted in an evening dinner at an IONS event by none other than Dr. Edgar Mitchell, not only a PhD in science, but the 6th American to walk on the moon, the celestial body closest to Earth. Okay, so Randy Cramer was capable at inventing a story that was so dramatic that the 6th man to walk on the moon believed him and gave him an honorary dinner at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, a major exopolitical organization. Now, why did Randy Cramer say he had spent 17 years there? Because we were all talking about how he had spent just minutes, hours, or at most a day there. Why did he say that his wife died in his arms? Because we had talked about seeing our fellow astronauts die in our arms. And he was upping the ante. He was engaging in one-upsmanship by wowing the audience, by telling a more incredible story. Was that story true? No. So one of the things we have to keep in mind when we are debunking and identifying the exo-hoaxers from the exo-truth-tellers is that the exo-hoaxers always engage in one-upsmanship. They are trying to make money by lying, by making up their stories. According to a Marine Corps officer named Richard Cole, I don't know if this is true or not, I'm quoting somebody else, Randy Cramer has made as much as $130,000 by making up his Mars story. Now, he came along 4 years after I did, and I never raised enough money even to save my vision. So I want everybody to know that exo-hoaxing is not without serious damage. I may literally have developed legal blindness because I did not earn the money that Randy Cramer did, telling the American people the truth about my Mars experiences as he was inventing his story, and according to Officer Cole of the Marine Corps, pocketing as much as $130,000. So what I'm saying here is exo-hoaxing is not neutral. Lying is not neutral. That's why bearing false witness is violative of one of the 10 Commandments that's been in place since the Code of Hammurabi, long before the time of Moses. I'm saying that I may very well have been rendered legally blind by somebody grabbing the mic and telling a made-up story that was more fantastic rather than listening to those of us who were telling the truth about Mars. So our fourth exo-hoaxer that I'd like to cover again tonight is Randy Cramer. I defy anybody to take what we already know about Randy and believe him anymore. Let me give you just one more example because it's fraught with legal implication. Are you still there, Alfred?
Yes, I'm listening intently, and I'm up to 8 pages of double-sided notes.
Here's another tall tale told by Randy Cramer. And I won't be egotistical and note the fact that the principal person who really went to Mars coming forward was Andy, and the principal person coming forward who didn't go to Mars was Randy. And that's certainly an interesting rhyme. It would certainly confuse people about Mars in the way that A.B., Al Bielek, might confuse them about somebody known to be coming along later, Andrew D. Basiago. Andy Basiago, but I won't be egotistical and suggest that that's the problem. But I just lost my train of thought on what I was going to share about Randy. Oh yes, the military agent who came forward. Yeah, we've had officers in the U.S. Marine Corps literally testify that nobody named Randy Cramer was in the Marine Corps between 1987 and 2004, and nobody named Randy or Randall Cramer has ever been a captain in the Marine Corps. And Richard Cole stated why Randy Cramer's claims can't be true in terms of serving in the Marine Corps. So I would refer anybody to the account given by Marine Corps officer Richard Cole regarding Randy Cramer. Oh, I remembered what I was going to say about Randy's account. You may recall that I described how during the night run on the surface of Mars, I had my right arm torn off by predators, but by the time I got back to the debriefing room at 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California, my arm was somehow magically reattached. And I did not present this information as something that I knew how it had happened. I presented this as one of the abiding mysteries of my Mars experiences. I don't know whether it was happening because we were only going to Mars holographically. I don't know if I was moved back in time somehow when I had my arm and they basically erased that experience on Mars. I don't know to this day why my arm was ripped off all the way up to the shoulder. I still have some bursitis in that upper arm, up in the shoulder, like on a rainy day. But by the time I was debriefed by Bernard Mendez and Major Ed Dames back in El Segundo, my arm was back on my shoulder. And I described that mystery of our experiences. Randy Cramer, again engaging in one-upsmanship to try to create the notion that he had served on Mars, then advanced the story of the so-called medved, and he stated that he had been disintegrated cellularly on Mars. Now look, there is no device that can put the body back together again like that. The best advance we're looking at this point is what that great industrialist Elon Musk is working on, the Neuralink, which may be attached to our brain and be able to cure certain neurological damage to the human body. But I've talked to multiple doctors and PhDs. There is no device in which a body can literally be disintegrated and reconstituted at a genetic level, at a cellular level, and survive. In fact, any body that is disintegrated has to experience mortal death. It cannot be brought back to life. That is the definition of life itself. Now, initially, Randy Cramer was advancing the story of the medved and his account of being disintegrated totally because, of course, I had only had my arm ripped off and I couldn't provide the reason for how it got back on my shoulder. So he had to describe that he was disintegrated at the genetic or cellular level, and then he was put in this magical machine called a medved and reassembled at the genetic level, and now he's trying to sell the rights to that device even though it does not exist. Okay? So the original fraud about Mars is now being advanced by Randy Cramer in an actual commercial fraud, and that is selling an invention that doesn't exist. I have never seen a medved, so in that sense I cannot deny its existence. Am I certain that a number of claims made by Randy Cramer were exaggerations of what I had said? Yes, I've proven that, and I've proven that he doesn't know what he told Dr. Sala. He's given 2 different names for his wife on Mars, and many of his claims shadow mine, but again, the chief definer of those claims is one-upsmanship. They're always something more dramatic than what I or Stillings or Mendez, Whitecrow or Johnston shared with the public. So I would say that Randy Cramer's story reminds us how we have to contextualize what somebody says and say, is that consistent with what anybody else is saying? And wait a minute, if he spent 17 years on Mars, shouldn't he be able to name one comrade? And if he says in one interview that his wife's name was Deirdre, and he says in another interview that his wife's name was Doris, isn't he lying? And if he's trying to sell a medical device that doesn't exist, and that Elon Musk himself would tell you as he builds the Neuralink that it doesn't exist, isn't he lying? He's not a PhD in science, is he? Where did he go to school? Okay, we're not doing that in ufology or exopolitics. And we're endangering our country. We're endangering the West by not contextualizing and discerning what these exo-hoaxers are doing. Okay, we're living in an incredible time. And by the way, one of the people I wanted to mention that has nothing to do with exopolitics, who I think is a significant American researcher, who I was going to give the Presidential Medal of Freedom if I had won the presidency, is somebody like David Paulides. David Paulides' work identifying the untold story of the mysterious disappearances in our national parks, national forests, and Bureau of Land Management lands is brilliant. It is the best policing we have ever seen in the United States of America. The next president, or even President Trump, deserves to give David the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work. I have 5 theories of what's going on I'm going to share with David. But there's incredible stories that are being told in our time that are true. My story of Project Pegasus is true. My story of Project Mars is true. But I don't just limit it to exopolitics. I include really critical information coming forward. And I'm happy to use David Paulides' work as an example. He's now written 6 books in the Missing 411 series. And let me just cite one thing I know about what's going on in our more rural lands of this country. I have interviewed ranchers in the state of Washington who have literally watched their animals and meat that they would otherwise eat disappear in front of them. So what I'm saying, Alfred, is what's going on in our planet includes things that are so weird that we don't need and we're damaged by exo-hoaxing. What I'm saying is I'm going to be discussing with the great policeman David Paulides, author of the Missing 411 books, about the untold story of the missing people in our national parks and forests, that I have interviewed ranchers in the state of Washington who have literally done things like nailed ham hocks to walls outside and watched them disappear, meaning that some of the disappearances in our national parks and forests and BLM land that David Paulides has done so much great work around could have been caused by invisible predators. Invisible predators. The pictures of wolfmen in Michigan are true. My father and I watched a human being shapeshift into a wolfman right in front of us in the town of Espanola, New Mexico in the early 70s. What I'm saying, Alfred, is what's really going on our planet, and which implicates our existence as sentient beings, okay? What implicates the survival of our civilization after we're gone and our children are living here. It depends on the truth being waged in exopolitics, because some of the mysteries are so bizarre that some people would not have the ability to sleep at night if they knew what's really going on our planet. Let me give you one more. In addition to invisible predators and seeing a man shapeshift into a wolfman right in front of me, I interviewed a retired CIA agent named Richard A. Cox, who told me something even more frightening. And he claimed, I was introduced to him by a CIA agent that I knew in Pegasus, who searched me out in Oregon in the early part of the 2010s, named Virginia Olds, that our Air Force is placating one of the ET species. Richard A. Cox of the CIA told me, or former CIA agent. In fact, he was known as Clackamas around Portland, Oregon, the former CIA agent, Clackamas. He's now deceased. But Richard A. Cox of the CIA told me that our Air Force literally places the flesh of human children on pallets in remote locations of U.S. air bases so that a certain ET species can come down and pick up those pallets of human children's flesh because they consider it a delicacy. So my point in telling this horrifying story is that the people of this country, the people of this hemisphere, the people of this planet need to know that the evidence that I've gathered over a lifetime suggests that, in other words, by not just serving in Pegasus and the Mars program, but by literally doing things like searching out retired CIA agents like Richard A. Cox and learning this serving up of the flesh of human children to one of the ET species. The people of this world deserve to know that the major world governments have been compromised by different extraterrestrial species. Do I believe that all ETs are cannibals of human flesh? No. In fact, in the same way that I listened to what Richard Cox had to tell me about that claim, I was also interested in Bernard Mendez's claim that none of the ETs are carnivores. So if they're all carnivores, they can't be eating the flesh of human children. And I don't know why I was told that by a CIA agent. Maybe it was to make me frightened about the ET situation. When I was a student at UCLA, a CIA agent working on the UCLA faculty took me down to the City of Industry, and he put one of those devices on my heads where you can, it's called a jawbone, where you can hear what you're being told through vibration back on the mastoid bone behind your ear. And he said, Andrew, I brought you down here for only one reason, and that's to tell you that we're concerned that the ETs are going to be going for a total takeover of our planet. So my point here is that without Randy Cramer's inventing stories about going to Mars, we have to begin a national debate about what the ET situation really is. Now, we know that what the American government is doing in space is far more advanced than the people are being told. We had that, who was that, that executive who worked for Lockheed Skunk Works, said that everything you think we can do, we've done. We now have the technology to take ET home.
Right.
I'm blanking on his name, but a chief executive of Lockheed Skunk Works, which was literally part of Project Mars, made the statement that we now have the technology to take ET home, which implies that we have spacecraft that can go outside our solar system and have, which indicates that the Project Serpo story is probably true. That, of course, being the story about the astronauts who left our solar system to go to a distant star system. But what can we say about the American government at this time? That brings us to our fifth and sixth exo-hoaxers, Barack Hussein Obama and Donald John Trump, the last two presidents of the United States. When five American astronauts came forward, I think at that time only three of us had, myself, Stillings, and Mendez. There were three disinformational ploys perpetrated by one of our fellow astronauts who had become the 44th President of the United States, Barry Soetoro, who had been successful in politics after changing his name to Barack Hussein Obama. That seems like to be a bit of a pattern, doesn't it? Notice how Ralph Angerman changed his name to Alex Collier. One wonders whether Randy Cramer is really even his name. But when we began to come forward about our Mars experiences, the first disinformational ploy perpetrated by President Obama was in January of 2012. He had Tommy Vitor, the PR director for his National Security Council, plant a story in WiredMagazine.com stating that the only contact that President Obama remembered having with Mars was watching Marvin of the Martians on Saturday morning cartoons with his two daughters. Now, at that time, an emissary, an intermediary of President Obama, was telling Bernard Mendez that he remembered Project Mars, he remembered me vividly, because I was certainly a colorful personality in those days, and we had briefly roomed together. We had been on Mars a number of times together, and we had interacted, saying things to each other. And but he said that his memories of Mars were vague and dreamlike. So why was he telling his fellow astronauts that he remembered us and he remembered the program and he remembered being on Mars, but he was telling the American people, the people that he was elected to serve, that the only memory he had of Mars was watching Marvin the Martians on Saturday morning cartoons? That was the first disinformational ploy of Obama. The second was when the Mars exploration rover Curiosity was launched that year. He gave this long, sanctimonious speech saying, well, probably if you find anything up there, it'll only be microbes. But if you do, I'm very busy, but you might try to reach me and to tell me that you found microbes. Well, wait a minute. That was said by Barack Obama, who not only was on Mars and saw humanoid and animal life forms on the red planet, but he had been lectured on it by Ed Dames in summer of 1980. I sat right next to him during those lectures. That's why I know he saw those lectures. That's why I know President Obama knew that there were sophisticated life forms on the red planet, life forms which now have been proven by a number of anomalists who are in touch with me, who are presenting images that are far better than any that were presented in the past. So any criticism that anybody could make of my original Mars images has been obviated by really important findings. So stay tuned. The Mars Anomaly Research Society will again be coming to the rescue of the truth. Okay, so the second ploy by Obama was suggesting that if they found any things, they would clearly be microbes. That was kind of the Gil Lavin kind of position, you know, on Viking 2, that he had actually found microbes on Mars. And then, before he left office in 2016, President Obama wrote an incredibly deceptive essay for CNN.com in which he said, we'll probably get there in about 30 years, but we will get there to Mars. Well, wait a minute. Barack Obama and I participated in the CIA in writing parts of the CIA's threat assessment of the Martian humanoid civilization. We did so in the summer of 1980. We did so based on a stack of about 4 inches of French intelligence documents about Mars. One of those documents was from the French External Intelligence Organization, or agency. And it stated that American astronauts first went to Mars in 1964. So that allows us to contextualize how the United States government has lied to the American people just unconscionably. They first go to Mars in 1964, and somebody who went in the 80s is lying about the fact that we're going to go to Mars 30 years in the future in 2016. I mean, we're talking about 50 and 60-year cover-ups. Now, when NARA was formed in 1958, which later became NASA, the American Congress, speaking as the will of the American people, speaking for the American people as their elected representatives, gave NARA, which became NASA, a primary mission. And that mission was the expansion of human knowledge of space and the near-Earth environment. And yet, an American astronaut who went to Mars in the 1980s, after fellow Americans had originally gone to Mars as early as 1964, was lying about Americans on Mars in 2016. And that was our 5th exohoaxer, the soon-to-be discredited Barack Hussein Obama, who, as I said, and as you mentioned, whose real name is Barry Soetoro. And by the way, isn't it interesting that Trump and all these other people have been, or like Alex Jones, who've been talking about Obama, have stated that his name was Barry Soetoro, E-R-O. It wasn't. It was Barry Soetoro. Why do I know that? Because he told me. And I even said to him, oh, Barry Soetoro, your name is sort of like mine. It sort of has a similar cadence. Andy Basiago, Barry Soetoro. That's what I said to Barry Soetoro to familiarize myself with him as a colleague. That was in summer of 1980. Why are Trump and Alex Jones and others calling him Barry Soetoro? There's no authoritative information that he's Barry Soetoro. The kindergarten document that said he was a Muslim and his name was Barry Soetoro, it's written right on there. Okay? And that's what he told me his name was, Barry Soetoro. How come all the people who knew him are not being questioned, but all those who say they know about Obama are giving a slightly different name? Could that be a ploy? I think so. So our fifth exo-hoaxer is none other than Barry Soetoro, who is the CIA agent who has been using the name Barack Hussein Obama. And the sixth is Donald John Trump. Why do I say that? Well, it just happened. I want to now give the background for what we just witnessed from President Trump. If anybody watched or listened to the, I thought, rather well-produced RNC a week or two ago, we heard on Wednesday night the son of the president, Eric Trump, state that it's about time that we went to Mars. And then on Thursday night of the RNC, President Donald Trump stated that it's about time, said the same thing that his son said, it's about time that we start to go to Mars. Now, what did Donald John Trump have in his inbox 5 weeks before he said that to the American people? He had a letter from me that completely briefed him on the Mars program, and then the similar letter that I sent to President Obama, I also sent to President Trump. In other words, when President Trump and his son Eric Trump talked about Mars on the RNC, I want my fellow Americans to know that they are lying. They were briefed. I briefed them. How did I brief them? I sent a long, incredibly convivial and diplomatic letter, first to President Obama and then to President Trump. What did those letters include? In the letter to President Obama, I asked him to come forward because I told him he was going to be historically discredited as a liar if he didn't admit or ultimately admit his involvement in Project Mars. And at the same time, I commended him for being one of the smartest and best college classmates that I knew, college-age peers that I knew during my years at UCLA. He, of course, was first going to Occidental College in Eagle Rock, California, when I was enrolled at UCLA. And I was supposed to go to Columbia when he transferred to Columbia. Who asked us to do that? The CIA. Okay, so I said to Barry, as I called him in the letter, because that's how I knew him in personal experience, I said, Barry, if you don't come forward and acknowledge you were in Project Mars, to the degree that I've now lectured all over the hemisphere, and 3 other gentlemen who went forward, in addition to you and I, have come forward, and I've named 17 Americans who went to Mars, there's no way you're going to sustain the fiction that the only contact you had with Mars was watching cartoons with your daughters. It's going to be laughable. It's going to be one of the most dishonest things an American president ever did. So I basically urged him to come forward to save his historical reputation because I viewed him as a very smart guy and a very good person when I knew him. Okay? With President Trump, I stated that he should declassify the Mars program because there was no compelling reason for keeping it secret, and I commended his handling of the COVID-19 crisis by closing movement of Chinese individuals and Europeans who might be infected, and then ultimately promoting the use of masks and so forth. Now, was that true? Well, we now know from the Bob Woodward interview that President Trump has admitted lying about the danger of COVID-19, ostensibly, he says, to prevent the American people from panicking about the degree of infection that was occurring. But to assuage the ego of Donald John Trump, I commended him in the letter diplomatically and thanked him for his handling of the COVID-19 crisis, which of course did involve closing shipments of people from China and Europe, which were then the epicenters of infection. So it was somewhat true, but it wasn't true of the fact that President Trump was actually lying about how serious the infection rate in the United States of America was. Now, why did I do that? I did that basically because he's an egotistical individual. Now, how did he respond? Did he call me on my house line, which I provided with my letter? Did he check the Washington State Bar to find out that I'm admitted there and in good standing, even though currently I'm inactive because of my vision problems? Did he send me a letter in return? No. 5 or 6 weeks passed, and he had his son Eric and he himself lied to the American people, saying that we have never yet gone to Mars. There's no other way of construing their comments when they both said we have to finally go to Mars. And then he said we have to put a woman on the moon. Sure, we haven't put a woman on the moon. Notice that mixture of truth and falsity. We haven't put a woman on the moon, but we've been on Mars with men and women since 1964. There were as many women in the Mars program that I worked with as there were males. In fact, they were on Mars confronting predators 2 years before Sally Ride was the first American woman to ride on the space shuttle, according to NASA. So we have actually impeded the self-concept of American women and girls realizing they can do whatever men can do, like go to another planet, because we've been lying about what our own citizens have done by going there. Now, why am I angry? I'm angry because I went there at the risk of my life. Going there through the aeronautical repositioning chambers was a new technology. Going to a planet with predators on it was dangerous. And after he collapsed, I carried Bernard Mendez a mile on my shoulder and had a small heart attack. I'm on carvedilol now, a cardiac medication, because of that small heart attack, okay? I paid a price going to Mars, okay? And I was told that I had won the Space Medal of Honor by saving Bernie's life on the surface. Where is it? We weren't paid, we weren't given our benefits, we weren't given our medals of honor, and now we see the last 2 presidents lying to the American people. This is unconscionable, and I want to see Barack Hussein Obama and Donald John Trump personally apologize to me, or I'm going to up the ante on this and tell more and more people. I'm going to spend all my time lecturing about the Mars program. This has been unconscionable conduct. You know, it's not like, you know, in the case of Obama, it's not like Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the moon and then Richard Nixon lied about them and said they didn't go. That's what Trump did to us. When Obama said that we didn't go and he never went, that was like Aldrin lying about Armstrong going, because he went. At least in the case of Trump, Trump may have been not believing my letter. He may just be a skepticist. You know, one of the things I think we have to get to terms with in exopolitics and throughout epistemology in general in our society, epistemology is the study of the theory of knowledge. There's a major epistemological dilemma or fallacy that's rife in America. It's particularly rife among the well-educated, the doctors, the lawyers, the people with at least a bachelor's degree in the arts or sciences from a major respected university. And that is that while it is true that high strangeness connotes low credibility, and low strangeness tends to support or connote high credibility, it is not axiomatic that something that is highly strange is not true, and that something that seems more believable is true. So, for example, the example I use with this is that my time travel claims are true, even though they're stranger than Randy Cramer's Mars claims. Those claims are no less strange than all of the Mars people who've come forward, but they're not true. So it is not axiomatic that which is highly strange is not true. or that which is believable is true. Now, what's happening in America is that medicine and the law and professorships are becoming increasingly occupied by those who know what they've been told, not those who know what they've experienced. That's why I've focused so much as an experiencer. I will go to no limit, by the way, to share my experiences. I've shared my time travel and Mars experiences, and I will be sharing a trilogy of my paranormal experiences. That trilogy has been written, and I'm almost finished with my memories of my past lives, which was actually largely made possible by my substantial loss of vision. It allowed me to focus on my past lives. But I've been actually studying my past lives since earliest childhood. So I'm going to continue my truth campaign and extend it into everything that's happened to me, my paranormal experiences, my past life memories, and so forth. But I want people to contextualize the fact that, look, just because something is more strange than something else, that which is more strange can be true, and that which is less strange can be false. You know, so for example, my time travel claims are true, but did Joan Rivers really die when she revealed the fact that Barack Obama's wife is a guy? The Michelle is Michael story, the fact that the First Lady of the United States under President Obama was a transvestite or transsexual? No, there are individuals who have now identified that Joan Rivers is still alive, but had some kind of plastic surgery to conceal her appearance. So what I'm suggesting is that the notion that Joan Rivers is dead is easier to believe that I time traveled, but it's less true. She's actually still alive, and I didn't lie about time travel. I told the truth about something stranger. Okay, so this is what we need to start understanding in exopolitics about the epistemology of exopolitics. That which is stranger does not axiomatically have to be considered less believable or less true. Something can be incredibly far out and be true. And I mentioned a couple in this interview. The Wolfman that my dad and I saw. The interview I had with CIA agent Richard A. Cox, where he said that our Air Force is serving the flesh of human children up on pallets at U.S. air bases, and an ET species comes down and picks up those pallets because they consider the flesh of human children a delicacy. And the interviews I did with ranchers from Washington State who have seen the flesh of animals just disappear, revealing the existence of invisible predators on the American mainland. That's why we have to discredit the exo-hoaxers, because the reality of what's actually going on our planet is far more serious, far more dangerous, and far more frightening than any of us have been told. Why is that? Because of the Brookings Institute sort of thinking. Well, they're not going to be able to handle the truth. Didn't Jack Nicholson tell us that in a famous movie? A Few Good Men, I think it was called. We can't handle the truth. And that's what's going on in America. Now, when these exo-hoaxers come forward, the government is either putting them in motion and actually training them and sponsoring them, or when they reach a certain amount of notoriety and they know they're not true, what are they doing? They're then doing television shows about them. And that explains the only reason why Fox News covered a story about Al Bielek, who's been deceased since 2011. And yet during that whole period since 2011, actually since 2004, I've been talking about the actual U.S. time-space program. Why would Fox be motivated to do that when I identified him as an exo-hoaxer just a week earlier? So what they're doing is they're promoting the liars and hoaxers, and they are defaming the truth-tellers and the experiencers, even those who have worked for our government. That is un-American. I could not even get the attention of Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, one of the most liberal and conscientious representatives in the, or, you know, members actually of the Senate in the American government. Even a very liberal, principled Democratic senator would not take my call. I spoke to a member of his staff, and yet Senator Markey never called me. I said there are a group of Americans who have served in classified defense projects, including going off-planet, and we have been completely ripped off. We weren't given our salary, our benefits, the GI Bill of Rights, our military decorations, and it's unconscionable and it's un-American, and not even Ed Markey of Massachusetts would get on the phone. So what I'm saying, Alfred, is my belief of the situation is that the situation is so serious and the American government has become so negligent that we are going to have to replace it. And so I will not be running for president of the United States of America. I will be running for president of the new United States of America. I believe we literally have to find a better way to elect the leadership of this great country, or we are doomed. And anybody who wants to check anything I've said today, I would invite you to do so, and even call me if you'd like, if you have some disagreement, because I've told the truth to the best of my ability. And I frame these arguments as such. But, you know, epistemology is the study of the theory of knowledge. What happens in this country is that, you know, I'll give you one example on time travel. I approached Michio Kaku, one of the great quantum physicists of our time, in the early 1980s when he was speaking at the Committee to Bridge the Gap, which was Daniel O. Hirsch's anti-war group in West LA. And I said, Dr. Kaku, what do you think about advanced applications in quantum physics? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, like teleportation. And he said, oh, I don't know anything about that because I refused to work on more sophisticated nuclear weapons with Dr. Edward Teller, so they didn't let me into any of the weird far-out stuff going on at LANL. And I said, well, that's very interesting that you weren't let in on the secrets, because in childhood I was in Project Pegasus under Dr. Harold M. Agnew when he was the director of the Los Alamos National Labs, the very labs you've told me that you were not let into because you wouldn't build more destructive nuclear weapons with Dr. Teller, who I also met when I was in the program. And do you know, Alfred, that when I said that to none other than Dr. Michio Kaku, he literally turned around and walked away from me across the floor of that conference hall? And then he went on to write books about what? Time travel. So then if you go to a lawyer and say, well, I want to sue for my time travel experiences or going to Mars for the country, and I was cheated of everything, their understanding is from Michio Kaku. You see, so in other words, the epistemology of the United States has been completely screwed up by official state secrecy, so that we're literally lionizing physicists like Michio Kaku and David Deutsch and Stephen Hawking and Ron, what's his name, from the University of Connecticut at Storrs, that black gentleman who wants to develop time travel. And these individuals weren't let into the secrets. And they're advanced by public television and other major platforms in the media as the experts on when we're going to go to Mars, when we're going to have time travel. And they're literally the individuals who were kept out of the secrets. You know, I used to walk by Stephen Hawking every day practically when I was a student at Cambridge in 1994, 95. His offices were right near mine, near 19 Silver Street, the Department of Land Economy. And yet I never had a discussion with Dr. Hawking about time travel, but I was a time traveler. You see, so the epistemology, the study of the theory of knowledge, is breaking down in the West. And the principal reason for that is the way the intelligence community is manipulating the American people and other people, the countrymen and women of other countries. They are doing various things to keep secrecy so that we don't even know, for example, when Eric Trump and Donald Trump said we now have to finally go to Mars on last week's RNC, we don't know if they were motivated to say that because they got my letter and didn't believe it because they haven't been told by the CIA and other agencies that we've been going to Mars since 1964. So we may literally be in truly a constitutional crisis in the sense that the sitting president of the United States himself didn't know he was lying to the American people when he and his son told us last week that we have to finally go to Mars. You see? So this crisis in epistemology is so ingrained in this point, I don't even believe the President of the United States can make the right decisions because they're not being told the truth by the intel community and the military. And in fact, as people get older and pass away, many times the danger is that those who worked in these highly classified, highly compartmentalized programs pass away, and even knowledge that these programs existed begins to get lost to the government. So I don't know how many people there are at CIA right now who believe and understand that my story about Projects Pegasus and Project Mars are true. I mean, if we were to interview, let's say, all CIA agents under 50 today, it'd be interesting to get the percent who believe that we went to Mars, for example. But we did. So I'm still speaking out because we are in a serious epistemological crisis that rises to the level of a constitutional crisis. That's what those who've been following your brilliant work in exopolitics, and I hope my own interviews will know and understand that this is not a cavalier subject. This is a deadly serious subject. When we've got a CIA agent saying that we're putting the flesh of human children out on a pallet to appease a certain extraterrestrial species that likes to eat it, when ranchers in Washington State are telling me that they saw the flesh of animals disappear right in front of them, implying the existence of invisible predators, when David Paulides has written 6 brilliant books about the missing persons in our national parks and forests, which have still not been explained, when my father and I saw a man shapeshift into a wolf man right in front of us, okay, we really have to get to the heart of what is going on our planet because it's not happy information. It's frightening.
Right. You know, for me also, what I thought was a very transformational moment in this interview, in this segment, was when you said, that is why I'm not running for president of this government, of this current government of the United States. It has to be a new United States. And that's a whole new conversation. And for people who would like to join you and contact you and reach you in that new conversation, or would like to participate in that, what is the best way for them to do so, to be able to begin to reach you and begin to participate in that conversation about a new United States, which is part of the new Earth?
They can join my Facebook group, Andy for America. Now, that actually lends itself to another interesting story, Alfred. I hope these are interesting stories. I ran for president in 2016 at andy2016.com. That's where I published my 100 proposals, a new agenda for a new America. And then in the intervening years, I realized that that's really what we need is a new United States of America with a new way of selecting our leaders. And so I will lead that effort in the same way that, Jesse Jackson fought for civil rights and so forth. I'll lead it as a public speaker and a media personality. But we'll really try to get going on this because I've heard many good ideas to actually reform the American electoral system and the system of government. One of the things, obviously, that would rectify a lot of these problems is open source intelligence, as recommended by Robert David Steele, open source intelligence would be incredibly beneficial to America and the world, because a lot of these problems are just simply being created by an insane addiction to secrecy. And people who get into the intelligence community just begin to feed on this kind of paranoid style of American politics where everything is secret. And I mean, I even had CIA agents say things about me that were just totally untrue. But, you know, one CIA agent enters something in your record, and then everybody else reads it and thinks, oh, I'm being briefed on Andy, or I'm being briefed on Alfred. And they've got stuff in there about us that's not even true. Okay, so open source intelligence would solve a lot of this. But I wanted to say that, you know, I ran for president under Andy 2016. I had Andy2016@gmail.com, and then Andy2020.com, the website, and Andy2020@gmail.com were taken by none other than a 41-year-old with no experience of any kind to talk about, and that was Andy Yang. Andy Yang then ran as a Democrat. He participated in the debates, and then after unsuccessfully running for president at age 45 with really no background as a lawyer or a military official or a public official, just as the son of a rich father, he was then made a political commentator on CNN. But then again, CNN is about nepotism, right? Christopher Cuomo, son of Mario. Anderson Cooper, son of Gloria Vanderbilt, right? So they're the liberal wing of the CIA. And I wanted to make it clear that there is basically an allocation of the intel people in media to liberal and conservative. It's CNN and Fox News. Look at how they've excoriated President Trump, for example, on the left on CNN, but then they've excoriated Biden on Fox, or they've put Al Bielek in motion a week after I talked about him extensively on radio. Okay, so the story of running as Andy in 2016, as Andy 2016, lent itself to the story, where the hell did Andy Yang come from? I mentioned how I thought Randy Cramer may have been a way of confusing people for Andy in light of Randy about Mars, and how virtually everything that Randy Cramer has brought forward is an exaggeration of my account, a kind of a form of one-upsmanship. But could that have happened with Andy Yang? Yes, I think so. And the reason I think so is he has nothing to recommend him. Now, I'm not bragging, but nonetheless, it's true that I have 5 degrees. It's true that I was a protege of somebody who served 3 presidents, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, that being Norman Cousins. It's true that I'm a member of a federal agency, basically the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington. So I guess I'm saying I'd ask people, if you think that we're not being manipulated by government agents, intel agents, who are posing as TV broadcasters, who are posing as political candidates, investigate Andy Yang. Who is he? Where did he come from? Who is his father? What does he have to personally point to and say, because I did this, I'd make a good president? Now, what I did, and I'm not bragging, I'm just stating what I did to contextualize my own candidacy for office. I said, I'm Andy Basiago from Morris Plains, New Jersey, but I have 5 degrees, including degrees from UCLA and Cambridge. I'm not just a member of the Washington State Bar Association, but the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington. My first job as a writer was with Captain Jacques Cousteau. Those same 3 years were spent learning about the problems of this world under one of our most brilliant editors, Norman Cousins. I've written books. I've done 500 TV and radio shows. And I've worked in 3 classified defense projects, one I don't even talk about. Okay, because some very serious things happen. And ask that of Andy Yang. Say, Andy, who are you? Andy Yang, who are you? I know who Andy Basiago is. And why were you invited to be a commentator on CNN after running for office, a campaign in which you took a number of Andy's ideas from his 100 proposals, but Andy, who wrote 100 proposals, who was the 280th American to graduate from Magdalen College, Cambridge, since it was founded in 1428, why wasn't he invited to be a political a political commentator on CNN. What have you ever done, Andy Yang, besides run for president that qualifies you to be a political commentator on CNN? Are you a lawyer? Are you a political scientist? Have you served in classified projects? Who are you? Okay, the Andy Yang candidacy will bear out the truth to the American people that our intelligence community has become so abusive in its use of power, its abuse of power, that it is literally staging political candidacies. I think, in fact, that President Trump has probably been excoriated as much as he has been because he didn't come through the CIA the way that President Barack Obama did. Why do I know that Obama came through the CIA? Because we were being briefed by the CIA when we were going to Mars, and a CIA agent told me to transfer to Columbia from UCLA in the fall of 1981, the very semester that Barack Obama, or Barry Soetoro, I should say, was told to transfer from Occidental College in Eagle Rock, California, to Columbia. Okay? So I then interviewed a lovely woman who's extremely honest, who is the mother of a radio producer who was at the CIA in 1982. She's aware of the CIA's abuses of powers, and she contacted me and revealed to me that our suspicions about Obama are true because when she was at the CIA in 1982, he was there. So when we search and try our very best to figure out why Barack Obama lied about going to Mars, when being an American astronaut has always been a position of honor and of bravery, we think it possibly could be because he did not want to reveal that he has been a CIA agent since he was in college. I don't know. I still find it strange that he lied about going to Mars. I think it would have helped him in terms of getting more support than he got when he was president. I think it's something that he should be proud of. I don't know. But we think it's probably because he doesn't want to connect himself to the CIA, because there were CIA people in the Mars program, like Courtney Maurice Hunt. So, but we don't know. So I want the American people to know that we need a new government because our current government and mainstream media are controlled by the intelligence agencies and the military agencies, and we have no semblance of democracy because they sold all of those of us who were going to Mars on how much money we would make and what benefits we would get. We would get the GI Bill of Rights. We were supposed to get money to buy a house in the Redding, California area. I was told about earning the Space Medal of Honor for saving Bernie's life that time. We were sold basically a bill of goods, and now 40 years later, July 7th, 2021 will mark the 40th anniversary of my first trip to Mars on July 7th of 1981. And the last two presidents have lied about Mars. This is just not tolerable. The government of the United States is not working in the way that it should be. Does that prosecutor from San Francisco that Biden picked, Kamala Harris, who's 3 years younger than me, does she know that Americans have been to Mars? So imagine that. Somebody's going to become vice president of the United States and has no conception that Americans have been to another planet besides the celestial body known as the moon. That's where we are right now, not just as a people, but as a government. We are in danger because of official state secrecy having run amok. There was nothing that benefited Donald Trump to be putting on all those interesting stories of people during the RNC to try to make a case for him being reelected, to ignore my letter and not even read it on the air. The country would have loved it. He would have said, now see, this is a great American. This is a brave American who wanted me to know what he and his colleagues achieved going to Mars. There was no reason for Donald Trump to lie about about Mars right after I sold him that letter. The fact that he did means he's not at the top of the system. So that's another thing we have to come to terms with, that the presidents are not at the top. They are somewhere down the ladder. I can see no other reason why not only Donald Trump would lie about Mars, but he had his son lie about the same thing the previous day. And they perpetuated a myth that Obama spread that we haven't been to Mars, even though they were concerned about the birther controversy when they were running in 2016. Some of the first comments Donald Trump made as a presidential candidate were in furtherance of the notion that President Obama had lied about his background. I was available to him to tell him who Obama was and how he had lied. And President Trump never contacted me. He, like Alex Jones, always mispronounced Barry Soetoro's name, Barry Soetoro. That's interesting. And he still hasn't talked to me. He still seems interested in the fact that Obama lied about his background. Has he ever contacted me? I went to another planet with the guy. I roomed with the guy for a period of time. One time I came into our dorm room at College of the Siskiyous, and Barack Obama was dressed in that white sash and that red mufti. That's his Islamic clothing. And I said, Barry, I didn't know you were Muslim. And he said, yeah, I'm a member of Subud. And he talked about how he was not only a Muslim who was a member of the Subud sect that was started in Indonesian, but that Muhammad Subud Sumiwadi Hadjojo, the founder of Subud, was his birth father. So I had material information demonstrating that at least his father was foreign born. Has Donald Trump ever contacted me? No. So, in other words, people are reaching the White House and they're not even learning the truth about controversies that have been raging on the internet because they don't even do their research with the people who have the experience-based information to clarify those mysteries. So I'm concerned, Alfred. I'm concerned. Right. I believe the American nation is falling so far short of how it is supposed to act, for example, by honoring its astronauts, that's an easy one, that I believe we need to change our government, literally change the government. We need a new United States of America.
Well,
and of course, it would have to be a convention of some kind.
Yeah. So do you think that there was some truth to what your father said when he said two future presidents in the Mars training, referring to Barack Obama and yourself?
Well, he clearly was referring to me, because when Brett Stillings' father, Thomas J. Stillings, said to Brett, how do you like being in a Mars program like this with a future American president? And he then nodded to Barack Obama as Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama, went up to the front of the room to talk to Major Ann Dames, the teacher of the program. My dad then thrust two fingers in the aisle between our respective desks and looked at me, and with his eye twitching, my dad had kind of a nervous tic that when he was nervous about something, right below one of his eyes, I think it was his right eye if I'm not mistaken, he looked at me and said, two future presidents. And then when he and I took Barry Soetoro to the Hoopa Indian Reservation up north of Weed so that he could fly to Portland, Oregon, to fly to Hawaii to visit his grandparents during the program, we dropped Barry off at the airport, and then we were driving back to Weed in our hotel room, and I said to him, Dad, do I really become president? And he said, yes. And I said, does Barry too? And he goes, yes. And I said, when? And he says, Barry becomes president in his 40s, and you become president in your 60s. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah. Now, Barry Soetoro / Barack Obama is 45 days older than me. He was born on August 4th of 61. I was born on September 18th of 61. So if we now talk about what elections my dad could have been talking about, where it would have been in my 60s, that would be 2024 or 2028, or maybe possibly 2032, if he was just a little mistaken that I was a little bit closer to 70, but or 71. But yeah, my dad was serious, and I then discussed it with Courtney Hunt of the CIA, and 3 times I said, Courtney, do I really reach the White House? I was kind of remembering what my dad had told me in 1980. So this is 25 years later. This is like 2005, or a little bit before that, because Courtney lost the ability to speak around 2005. I said, Courtney, do I really reach the White House? And the first time I asked that, he said, yeah, but I don't know how you get there. The second time he said, no, but you're going to be on the scene. And then the third time I asked him that, he said, have you been briefed on 2015? And 2015 was when I first announced for president. So I don't know whether I was on a timeline where I would have become president, and that timeline was obviated by my discussions of time travel and Mars, as some of my brighter UCLA classmates have suggested that I've disqualified myself by talking about themes that are too far out, when all, in fact, I've done is talked about programs I was actually in, told the truth to the American people, like too few political leaders have. I don't know whether they actually have kiboshed my chances by doing things like running Andy Yang to confuse the American people about who Andy was. I don't know. I don't really know what's going to happen. And now with my vision loss, I'm hoping on visual improvements that will make running even advisable. So it's still all up in the air. It's actually kind of an interesting example of quantum access. If we're to believe what my dad told me in 1980 about becoming president and what he told me in 1985 about the restoration of my vision, it would seem that surgery will be restoring a substantial amount of my vision, and I will someday be president of the United States. But I have decided, and I'm announcing in this interview with you, and by the way, you're certainly an American I'd like to see in the White House as our president, because I think
Wow.
I've described you as like one of the William Lloyd Garrisons of our time, and what I mean about that, Alfred, is you have been on the case. You have been intimately involved in researching and reporting about some of the principal issues of our time, or most of the principal issues of our time, going all the way back to the assassination of our 35th president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I think that posterity will recognize that. I think they will see in you a William Lloyd Garrison significance. And that's why I'd like to see you in the White House, but as our president. But I wanted to announce tonight that I will run for president again, but it will be for a new United States of America. And I will describe, like I did in my 100 proposals, what that America will have. Because for one thing we know is true, that we're wealthy enough now as a nation to have a guaranteed minimal income, at least in the $2,500 to $3,000 a month amount. There's no reason, in other words, why in a capitalist, finance-based society, anybody should not have money. Because we have the wealth to pay for that. And in fact, it's not a liberal idea. It was actually supported by Milton Friedman, the conservative economist. It's really just a way to eliminate poverty, because you give the guaranteed minimum income to the wealthy and the high income earners as well as the poor. It's not a transfer payment to the needy like Andy Yang presented it, because he didn't know what he was doing when he was stealing so many of my ideas from my 100 proposals. Because he was, after all, only 40 when I decided to run in 2015. When I announced for president, Andy Yang was only 40. Now that he's commenting about politics on CNN, I'd like somebody to ask him, what are your qualifications, Andy Yang, besides having a rich father? Because I've investigated Alfred, and he has no qualifications.
Right. And how did he make it to the debates? And, how did all of that happen? Really, he was
to the debates because the parties control.
Sure.
The parties control the process. The parties are controlled by the intel community, and everybody who's running, who's reported about, is working for the intelligence community and the military. The difference is they're just liberal or conservative.
Yeah, yeah. And so now this is 1950s Operation Mockingbird on steroids.
Right. I could have my 100 proposals described as awesome, brilliant, mind-blowing, unrivaled, genius in print, and a life experience to read, and as a Cambridge grad, be covered by Molly during the morning show on the BBC World Service, but not a single American television station or network covered me, despite 6 different American pundits describing my 100 proposals, my platform, as those things. Even though I was actually running, I even had Tom Danheiser at Coast to Coast AM, which I've appeared on 10 times, state that he didn't like me because I lied about running for president. And I did run for president. I spent 2 years running for president. So we're in a situation where people without qualification are running for the highest office in the land because they're being promoted by the CIA, and those who have really done things to qualify themselves for the presidency in the way that former American presidents have, by being military leaders, lawyers, scholars, explorers, etc., which characterized me, are literally being lied about on the air. And I was being lied about on Coast to Coast when I had already done 25 radio interviews. But even though I had that kind of response to my platform, 100 proposals, not a single TV station or network covered me in 2016. Why was that? Why was that? That was because they did not want to see an America that would be defined by my 100 proposals. I'm going to be publishing those 100 proposals as a book, and I would urge all of your readers to purchase it based on the advertisement that's going to go up at Andy for America. Now, some of those recommendations were rather far out, but was it really that far out to recommend protecting Sasquatch now that we know from Dr. Melba Ketchum that Sasquatch has the matrilineal DNA of us? And at that time, we had a show on American television called Killing Sasquatch. I put in my proposal about Sasquatch in the 100 proposals, not because I thought it was eminently important. The Sasquatch are actually very rare. I do think protecting other sentient beings matters. I love animals, and I want to see animals protected. I especially want to see humanoid animals with our DNA protected. And Sasquatch has our matrilineal or female DNA. That's why somebody a human male can have sexual intercourse with a female Sasquatch and produce an infertile child, but produce a child nonetheless because she has matrilineal DNA that is human. And yet we had a program when I ran for president only 4 years ago called Killing Sasquatch. Imagine if that had been killing Chinese people or killing Polish people or killing Irish people or killing French people or killing, black African people or whatever. We would have been outraged. And yet a species with our matrilineal DNA was being described in a show in this country, America, under the title Killing Sasquatch, and not a peep was raised by anybody running for president. And I brought it up with pride, saying that I'm the first American president since Theodore Roosevelt to address meeting Sasquatch, and I did when I was 5 years old. I met 2 of them, an older Sasquatch and his young son or grandson or nephew or tribal child. And the boy actually played keep away with me. So that's how human some Sasquatch are. And when our country was having a TV show called Killing Sasquatch. So those who have criticized my 100 proposals for that Sasquatch proposal, I stand by it. I'm proud that I was the first American presidential candidate since Theodore Roosevelt to talk about Sasquatch. And I added to TR's discussion of Sasquatch, which he encountered, I added the fact that they're half human, and I think that they deserve to be protected. Don't they? Don't we protect people who are missing something, the disabled or the retarded or the deformed? We don't say that people with birth defects should be murdered. Why were we saying that we should kill Sasquatch? I'm proud of that 100 proposal, and I'm not going to eliminate it just because it was controversial. People thought it was foppish to be talking about protecting Sasquatch. I did so in defense of a humanoid creature that has half the DNA that we have, namely all the female DNA, and that we can reproduce with. The only problem is that when we do reproduce with them, the offspring are infertile. And that happened with that case in Russia where men were sleeping with that Sasquatch. She kept on reproducing, but then the children were weak, and when she would wash them in the river, they would die. So, at least one of the Sasquatch species is very close to us, and I don't believe in killing higher primates. I just do not believe it. And that's why I called for protecting Sasquatch. We also, by the way, had an agreement with one of the major Sasquatch groups when some of their teenage males started raping our human females in the 1950s. We had an agreement with some of the Sasquatches to protect their habitat as long as they would rein in their young men and stop this pattern of rape. And I have spoken to law enforcement who have investigated rapes of human females and murders of human males by a particularly violent faction of Sasquatch. So in talking about protecting Sasquatch, I was talking about protecting an advanced primate that we've had negotiations with going back decades. Do American people know that? Do they know that Sasquatch is not only a legend, as Stacy Keach suggested, remember that? Sasquatch legend meets science, but has our matrilineal DNA, and we've had agreements with them for decades. Does Joe Biden know that? Does Donald Trump know that? I don't know. I know that by just talking to Intel people my whole life. That's why I got that discussion. I had that discussion with Richard A. Cox, and I found out about the flesh of human children being served up at U.S. air bases by our Air Force, okay? Because I've talked to Intel people my whole life. I've sought them out in some cases, or other people have sought me out. So, we have to start seeing a little bit more deeply into reality to save our country and save the world. And, it starts, I think, with exopolitics. We have to ask the hard questions of these people making these types of claims.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about the future of the new United States and of the new Earth?
Well, I think we can do it if we start a movement to get rid of the parties. Alexander Hamilton stated, I think it was in 55 of the Federalist Papers, that we wanted to avoid something that he called faction. Faction was the idea that certain groups of individuals would take over the government. Well, that actually happened in America. It's the political parties. So I think that my friend Jan Friedman, who's currently writing a book on this subject, will really be publishing an important book when he does, when he's finished. Because Jan emphasizes over and over again the need to get rid of the parties. The parties are really why less than honorable people like Barack Obama and Donald Trump are being elected to the presidency. It's really not a matter of one party or the other. That's the false dichotomy that the party system has created. And they just are basically, Ralph Nader also misdescribed what the problem is. Remember when Ralph said that, I have really high respect for Ralph Nader. He's done a lot of good in his life, and he's clearly a great lawyer that I respect immensely. But Ralph used to talk about the two-party duopoly. It's not a two-party duopoly. It's a one-party monopoly. They just trade the White House back and forth. So I would predict that probably, either Trump is going to get reelected or obviously Biden is going to get elected. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I suspect it's going to be Biden because I think they're really vilifying Trump as much as they can right now, and they want him out. But even if Trump gets reelected, the next president after that is expected to be a Democrat because they always trade the White House back and forth between the Republicans and the Democrats. So it's not, if you get locked into that partisan way of thinking, you think, I've got to support my party rather than their party, when in fact both parties are working for the same side. It's like playing cards with a card shark. So that means that the political system as currently organized cannot save us. We need to literally create a new America. And that has to involve eliminating the political parties, just as Alexander Hamilton warned us not to create, and create an honest way of electing individuals. You know, my friend Dr. Tomislav Hahn did a brilliant thesis in history at USC. In fact, he was the USC student who got his PhD in the shortest amount of time. It was in 2 years, where the average time from initiation of PhD to granting of PhD is 7 years. And Tom did a brilliant thesis. I'd recommend it to anybody if they're interested in American history or American constitutional history or law, on the Constitution of the United States. And Tom proved that the original idea of America was the aristoi, not the aristocracy of wealth or privilege, as supported by John Adams, but the aristocracy of virtue and talent as supported by Thomas Jefferson. That's why we made a Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., rather than an Adams Memorial, okay? Because they recognized that Jefferson had it right. We should be an aristocracy of virtue and talent. So the aristoi to the Founding Fathers, with all of their excellent education, was not the aristocracy defined by how wealthy or famous your family was, but it was the aristocracy based on the best people in society. So by that standard, a brilliant journalist, a brilliant physician, a brilliant teacher, a brilliant scientist should also be elected to office, even the presidency. And now instead we've had a surfeit, obviously, of lawyers, but we've also had basically a partisan system that has prevented the best people in society from becoming president. And I'm not saying I'm the best person in society. I'm just saying that my life experience demonstrated virtue and talent, and that was ignored because I didn't join one of the two major parties. That's why my campaign in 2016 was unsuccessful. And again, if anybody doubts that, ask yourself, what did Andy Yang do before Andy Yang supplanted Andy Basiago in running for president? What did he do? Who was he? I know he had a rich father. I've had a total inability to find out anything else interesting about Andy Yang. Was his mentor in college an intellectual who had served 3 American presidents and led the very worthwhile effort that Norman Cousins led to ban the bomb? Was his first employer in the private sector Captain Jacques Cousteau or anybody like that? In other words, who is Andy Yang? And why is he now a commentator on CNN? Because he ran for president? Well, I ran for president. I reached the BBC. You know, the BBC World Service is a more important international news program than CNN. Okay, so we have to take stock of the fact that America is being debased. It's being debased by mediocrity because of rule by the rich and rule by the intel community and the military. Why else are Chris Cuomo and what's his name on CNN, the son of what's his name? Anderson Cooper. You know, they're basically children of famous men. But before they became CNN journalists, what did they do? What did they do? What did they achieve? Where did they go to school? I think that Andy Cuomo went to Fordham Law School, so he certainly would qualify to become a governor of a major state. And I think he did a great job, by the way, on COVID-19 in New York. Certainly the people of New York know that COVID-19 is a real disease, a real serious problem, and have acted accordingly. But I think we have to start asking ourselves, where do these people come from? I think, based on the individuals I went to UCLA with, that they go through the CIA. I don't want to name a major journalist who I accused of being a CIA agent when I was in college, because I can't prove it. But one of my classmates at UCLA who didn't even write for the Bruin, didn't do any radio at the radio station at UCLA, which is in Ackerman Grand Ballroom, didn't do any internship for any TV news station. She went right to 2 TV stations in Los Angeles and then right to CNN. And I accused her to her face when we were as undergraduates at UCLA of being a CIA agent. And she ended up a top anchor at CNN. So I'm saying my knowledge of the fact that the mainstream media has been infiltrated by CIA, it goes back to college. Like I mentioned, the finding that note on the desk at the UCLA Daily Bruin, right. CIA for cash. And then it mentioned this Italian-American lawyer in Santa Monica, and I called him, and I verified that he was an attorney, and then I just hung up the phone. And then the person I told about that used Ajax to scrub it off the desk and never even said to me why it was there. Okay?
Exactly.
Now, if the CIA was hiring UCLA Daily Bruin writers to be CIA agents, doesn't it stand to reason that the major television people are? Especially when they lie about truth tellers with the ease that card sharks cheat at cards, Right. We really have to wake up to what's happened to our country. It's been undermined by the intel community, by pervasive military spending, and by absolute falsehood being meted out against truth tellers.
And by the electoral system, which grants the electoral monopoly to the Democratic and Republican parties. So
right, and it's obscuring the history and undermining the history of America in some really bizarre ways. I'll give you just one more example. One of my neighbors and somewhat of a mentor to me when I was growing up was Warren Edward Vincent. Warren was somebody who did everything in music, from play saxophone in Kay Kaiser's big band on the Bennington when he was a sailor during World War II, to doing A&R work for Barbra Streisand and Johnny Mathis and a bunch of people, Ray Conniff, Andre Castellanos, and so forth. And he told me, again, on personal experience, that Andy Williams was so nice that after he would come in and cut a song almost perfectly on the first recording, he would then look around to all the people working there and say, "Did you like that, everybody? Should I sing it again? Did I sing it well?" In other words, even though he was Andy frigging Williams, he would ask the lowliest sound engineer at one of his recording sessions whether he liked the recording and whether he should do it again. And yet I've heard people advance this rumor that Andy Williams was some kind of monster. Andy Williams was actually known in the recording industry as one of the nicest people you could meet in your life. And I think we all saw that in Andy Williams' personality. He was clearly an enlightened soul. I mean, he was a very beautiful person. And he sang wonderfully, but he was also just an extremely nice person. He was funny. He was never egotistical. He was always concerned about others. He testified for Claudine Longet when she got in trouble with that accidental killing of Spider Savage after Claudine Longet had left him. I mean, he was really a good guy. He moved in with Ethel Kennedy after Bobby was killed and didn't leave for a year, comforting Ethel Kennedy, who is, still alive, right? Even though Andy isn't. But Andy Williams was a beautiful person, and yet I have heard people claiming that he was some kind of monster. This is because a pattern of making up complete nonsense about honorable people has infected America. Look at what happened to me when I ran for president. Somebody who had worked in President Reagan's war against the Illuminati and its abuse of children was falsely accused of raping and killing 111 children.
Right. Isn't that the infiltration of the Luciferian factions of not only the intel, but of deeper sects, even going to the Mossad, going to that deeper type of stuff?
Potentially, I think we should all be worried about a claim made by somebody like Jay Parker that there are 40 million practicing Satanists in America.
Yeah.
I can certainly not prove that, but I can't disprove it. I think it's something we should be worried about. You know, the stories that are being told about rape and murder and child sacrifice in Hollywood, I think, have to be looked into. I've heard some stories, and they're quite disturbing. When I was working on the war against the Illuminati with President Reagan, I was shown a picture of a 4-year-old boy child who had been barbecued. That seems as hideous to me as the claim made by CIA agent Richard A. Cox, right to my face, that he knew that the American Air Force was providing not barbecued, but the flesh of human children to one of the ET species that was visiting our planet. Right there on the air base, right there on the Air Force base. I think we have to really get serious about studying and contextualizing these kinds of stories, because I think, unfortunately, some of this stuff is true. I don't doubt all the stuff that has been said about the cabal, because of that picture I was shown of that poor boy who had been barbecued. There are clearly some wicked people in this world, and I think that we're kind when we suggest that they can't be humans like us and that they are some other species like reptilian or what have you. I respect people who have certainly suggested that to me, that I don't think a human being could do that. At the same time, as an attorney, I know that there are very wicked things that humans can do to each other. But should we be cognizant of the possibility of I shouldn't say possibility, I should say fact that there are non-humans living among us posing as humans? Absolutely yes. Because, for example, my father and I seeing that shapeshifter, the man who shapeshifted, one minute he's a handsome Spanish-American guy in Española, wearing a pinstriped Armani suit, and the next day he's a wolf man with hair coming out of his shirt. Totally covered all over the face with hair, just like a Labrador retriever. I don't know what he was, but he wasn't a human being. So that's one of the most sensitive things about exopolitics that I think motivates the intel community to put the Randy Cramers and the Al Bieleks into motion on sensitive subjects like going to Mars and time travel, is they know that some of the humans living among us are not human. Some of the ostensible humans living among us are not human. There are non-humans living among us, just like Ruth Montgomery said. Remember that book of hers? I think it was called Aliens Among Us by Ruth Montgomery, the ufologist. Those people have been on the track. And isn't it interesting that those are the ufologists who have kind of passed quickly, suggesting possibly that they were bumped off because they were getting too close to the truth. Like M.K. Jessup on the real Philadelphia experiment. But no, I think exopolitics has to take stock and realize that because there are non-humans living among us who are capable of shape-shifting and looking like us, the government is either peopled by them and is maintaining the secrecy, which is a dreadful possibility, or numbers a lot of humans like us who for some reason want to conceal that fact so that the people don't panic, perhaps. But we can only ask. Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead.
No, we can only ask why the last 2 American presidents have lied about Mars. One who went and one who was briefed by me about everything he needed to know, not fully, but certainly extensively enough to call me on the phone if he wanted to. And President Trump, if you're listening, I have to ask, why didn't you call me? I mean, I know you were getting ready for the RNC, and the RNC really was a command performance stating the Republicans' position in a very articulate and passionate way, and so I admire the TV show that you put on, but and I don't think the Democrats was much worse, but also had some really good good passages. But I have to ask President Trump, why did you lie about Mars? I had briefed you with my letter just weeks earlier. Why didn't you call me? I'm not a nobody. I can guarantee, President Trump, if you and I are in the room, I'm going to be the smartest guy in the room. Okay? So you're going to have an experience not being the smartest guy in the room. Okay, I can't help having an IQ of 168. I can't help having 5 degrees, including degrees from UCLA and Cambridge. I can't help being the 280th American to take a degree from Magdalen College, Cambridge, since it was founded, over 500 years ago, 1428. Okay, President Trump, you have to start allowing yourself to be briefed by America's smartest. And Alfred Lambremont Webre and Andrew Daniel Basiago are 2 of those smartest. So you should really start making us advisors if you wish to win this election, and if you win this election, if you wish to win the hearts and minds of the American people. That's my message to you, President Donald John Trump. There will always be greater and lesser people than ourselves, and I am smarter than you. So it's time you began acting like it. I've always wanted to say that, Alfred.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. You know, we're actually, let me take a look at the timer here. I just have to click 2 numbers. We're actually at the 3 hour and 5 minutes mark, which is, this is the longest interview I have conducted, and the most intense, the deepest, and the richest.
Well, thank you, Alfred. Alfred, I want to tell you, and certainly Gwen wants to send her love too. We love you like a brother, and we believe in validating people when we're all here. And we wish to validate the fact that you are a great man and a great American. You've been a great writer, a great lawyer, a great activist, and a great American, and a great Canadian, which is not easy to do. And I say that, somewhat facetiously, but no, Alfred, you're a great man, and we love you, and we want you to know that we appreciate you. And there aren't many, and you've really kept the faith with the American people. And like I said, you've done it since you were working on the JFK assassination 40 years ago. And probably even almost 50, right?
Well, yeah, well, thank you. And Andy, I think that together, you and I can really make the world a better place. So leave us with some words and a promise as to what your next steps are, and what is the direction in which we all should be looking, and what should we do?
I finished the books. I've almost finished the 7th book that I have to finish to actually write something based on experience, and then those books will be done. I've got a couple more that I'm going to derive from lectures and conferences and radio shows and stuff, but I don't have any more original experience to capture in book form, okay? It's either been written or it's going to be written by just writing up what I've said in a certain context. So what I'm going to focus on is expanding the 100 proposals into a serious project to go to brilliant Americans like yourself and say, how can we correct the new United States of America? What should the new United States of America have? And then I'm going to be pushing for a constitutional convention that will do that, because I think we seriously need to try to expand the process that I began in 2016 with the 100 proposals into a group effort to say, look, an America with this many billionaires shouldn't have a single person who doesn't have money for food, for shelter, for education, shouldn't have a job or clothing and the necessities of life every month. And is the guaranteed minimal income a liberal palliative, a transfer payment? No, that was never the idea. It was actually just a clever way to change the ledger line to get rid of poverty. Okay, so like the guaranteed minimal income, I would want that process to begin asking, how should we elect our representatives to high office? We can keep the same positions, but we have to get rid of the parties and we have to change how we elect them. That's a major part. And as I mentioned, my great friend Jan Friedman is working on that component of the new United States of America. So we can adapt some of the ideas from my 100 proposals. We can focus on those that are essential. Another great example, I think, is I know from my personal experience, and I think you probably do as well, that both the allopathic doctors and the naturopathic doctors both have solutions, and that process of moving them both towards complementary medicine that really began when those 25 PhDs bought Life Extension magazine from Dirk Pearsall and Sandy Shaw, who were bodybuilders and not physicians of any kind, and then they began supporting some of the naturopathic stories and then signing them with their names with MD at the end. That was really the beginning of complementary medicine in America. And I know to a personal certainty that we have to get to complementary medicine, because when I developed macular degeneration and began to go blind, I found that when I used the naturopathic solution of drinking saffron tea, which has been used on the Indian subcontinent for 2,000 years to improve vision, my vision improved. I know it improved because after sipping the tea, I looked up at the cactus leaves of a, I forget what they're called, a mesquite. I looked up at a mesquite cactus tree in a friend's backyard in Arizona, and I could see every last leaf and every last point on the mesquite cactus leaves, even though before I couldn't even see what kind of tree it was. It was all just a green mass. So saffron improves macular vision, and it reverses macular degeneration, which many Americans will get as our lifespan is extended by other forms of medicine. We need to, I know we need both allopathic medicine as well, because the allopaths got rid of the bleeding in front of my retina. So my point there is that both naturopathic specialists and allopathic specialists save the vision that I still have. I'm going to be going back on saffron, by the way, because I had so much allopathic treatment in 2019. So what I'm saying here is, look, if America and Canada and other great countries are to lead this world, we need to lead it in advancing the cause of complementary medicine. That means we need to have, for example, allopathic MDs who will read Life Extension magazine and know what herbal supplements can help their patients for whatever they have. That is not going on in America. The allopaths are basically maintaining what's known as the standard of care, which is basically the existing allopathic solutions. Okay? So I wasn't told by any of the allopaths I saw about my vision in 2019, and I had 6 operations. Not one of them said, Andy, you should go on saffron because it'll improve your macular vision. But it does. It did. Okay? So at the same time, naturopathic medicine has opened itself up to quackery, in the sense that there are people making claims about supplements that are not true, and in fact they're dangerous. So for example, I don't want to mention it because I don't want a lawsuit, but I went on a supplement that was supposed to cure my diabetes, and it was supposed to do so by limiting the glycation of everything I ate. But it actually had a concentrated amount of blueberries in it, which drove my fasting blood glucose up from 110 in the morning to 170. And I need to avoid diabetes because it was high glucose levels from what happened to the kids who were teleporting in Pegasus that damaged my vision. So in other words, I have to literally watch and avoid any high glucose, any advent of diabetes. So this very supplement that friends of mine recommended that I go on was manufactured by somebody who made it more glycemic for the diabetic while simultaneously saying it was going to limit glycation in the bloodstream. That's just fantasy. So there is quackery going on among the naturopaths in the supplement field. That's something that we need to protect certainly Americans from now, and increasingly a growing number of world citizens who are ordering supplements on the internet. I forget the name of that thing that Albert Stubblebine was fighting, and his wife, Rita Lebeau. What was that thing about supplements that was being advanced? They wanted to.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I forget what it's called, but basically there was that move to want to put supplements under FDA control, just like drugs. Right? Because the FDA was created by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, right? Okay, so something is a medication, a drug, it gets tested by the FDA, but supplements don't. And the problem is they need to be. Because some supplements do exactly what those selling them say the opposite of what they will do.
I see.
I experienced that. My eyes may have gone into retinal bleeding from diabetes because the glucose level was so high because of the concentrated blueberry extract in the medication that I didn't get glycation of my glucose levels. My glucose levels were pushed into the diabetic range. Okay, so that's something that I would urge your listeners to know, is that we cannot just willy-nilly go on supplements based on some friend recommending to them. I mean, in the Northwest, where I was practicing law for almost 25 years, people are in the habit of recommending supplements with the frequency that they recommend restaurants, that they like. Right. And the problem is that the people doing those recommendations are just not either MDs or even NDs. And they're not nutritionists. So I would urge all of your listeners to confront a licensed nutritionist for every last supplement that is recommended to them.
Right.
So that's part of the dilemma that we're in. We're not really becoming a greater America. We're becoming a lesser America because untruth is overtaking truth. And that's just an area I wanted to mention because it's affected me personally. And at the same time, there's a lot of hope that we're going to be getting devices to repair the eyes and hearing and the nervous system and really expand our lives to possibly 120 years of longevity with high-quality living. So I would urge everybody to be quite hopeful about what's coming along. But at the same time, we need to be careful that we don't go on supplements that are totally unproven.
Right. Very good point.
I'm still going on supplements. I'm going to be going on saffron, and I'm going to be going on an ophthalmological product called Restore Vision. The only thing I haven't found out yet is, are there any concentrated berries or anything in it that will jack up my glucose levels? Because I cannot get high enough glucose levels. I could lose all of my vision if I do. I literally check my glucose in the morning and go walking if it's not low enough. And I've completely controlled my diabetes. And so you can do it. You can control diabetes, but because of diet, the population in the West and even now in the rest of the world that McDonald's and so forth are going to, the whole world is going diabetic. That's a major threat to humanity. Diabetes attacks the eyes, the heart, and the kidneys. So if you want to still see and you don't want to have a heart attack and you don't want to go on dialysis, make sure you control your diabetes. It's not an innocent. And I wasn't even briefed well enough by the allopath that I had when I developed diabetes. I had been briefed by Jack Pruitt of Project Pegasus in 2003 that diabetes was starting to attack all of the kids who had teleported because it attacked our pancreases. But then I was told I was diabetic by an allopath in 2004, but I was not told how dangerous it is, and it's terrible. It can diminish your heart function, it can stop your kidneys from working altogether, so you need dialysis, and it can blind you. So, yes, I believe my allopaths when they said that diabetic retinopathy damaged my vision, but I know where I got the diabetes from. It wasn't from eating a lot of chocolate or something. It was from teleporting for Project Pegasus. Now, if I take that lawsuit to any lawyer in America, and I've taken it to some of the leading lawyers on the West Coast, lawyers like J.J. Sandlin and Greg Kafori of Portland and Dennis Palmieri of Malibu, California, the lawyers tend to say the lawyers tend to believe me and say, Andy, if you sue on this kind of case, they're going to kill you, which is what J.J. Sandlin told me. But then some of the other lawyers on the West Coast that I went to said that they didn't believe me. And why? Because they've seen all the TV shows on time travel. Did they ever work with Dr. Harold Agnew, one of the leading Manhattan Project physicists, when they were a kid? You see, we're basically living in two different worlds. There's experiencers, and then there's people who's made up their view of reality based on education and media and what people have told them. And I'm saying that largely the non-experience-based information is just not true. So I've had really brilliant lawyers tell me, no, Andy, I will not sue the government for you to be paid for the medical damages that these programs caused, because time travel has been talked about as possible, but it hasn't been achieved. And I've come back and said, wait a minute, I was in the program that achieved it. Come on. Why do you know it hasn't been achieved? And they'll say something like, well, I saw Michio Kaku on a TV show. And I'll say, I confronted Michio Kaku about my time travel experiences almost 40 years ago, and he walked away from me. Okay? And then he wrote a book about time travel, or several books about time travel.
Right.
So it's,
exactly.
we just have to, get wiser and really start asking discerning questions of claimants. That's the key. And we have to change the way that we're electing our political officials, because it's a disaster.
Exactly.
I think that President Trump has been treated too harshly, but he really is an egotist who is extremely crass in terms of his comments about other people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just unprecedented from a president.
I understand that. Well, I must say that, Andy, that I look forward to experiencing the new United States of America and the new Earth with you.
Cool. And I think a new America will result in a new Earth. And, I think that part of that is going to be making everybody on Earth understand that America's position, the new America, the position of the new United States of America, will be that race is a fallacy. That every human being on Earth shares 87% of the same genes, regardless of gender, much less race, which is actually ethnicity. And that we, the United States, have known that since the end of World War II, when all of the encyclopedias mapped the phenotypes, the appearances of different ethnic groups all over the face of our beautiful planet. And every 15 or 30 miles, people's appearances changed a little bit. The only reason we recognize the difference between a black person and a white person, for example, is because people from Africa were brought over to America, okay? But fundamentally speaking, only 13% of our genes are different. That means that we're all brothers and sisters of one race. And so I hope, as President of the new United States of America, to give a major speech at the UN that we are all brothers and sisters and members of the same race. There are cultural differences. There are slight differences in appearance. There are slight differences in belief systems and behavior based on culture that still afflict different ethnic groups. But we, the United States, will be declaring that the idea of race, the idea that there was a black, a white, a brown, a yellow, and a red race was invalid. And we will be declaring as the United States of America that race is a fallacy. Actually, the ideal pattern of marriage between the so-called races, the so-called ethnicities, is that we tolerate what everybody chooses to take as a marital partner and as a person to reproduce with. Because if if endogenous marriage and childbearing is combined with exogenous childbearing, we will spread genetic diversity while also keeping certain diseases sequestered in one ethnic group or another. But the basic notion of race will be invalidated. The idea that there will be race riots will be laughable because we are all members of the same race. How can you divide people into different races and say they should be rioting against each other, or as one race rioting against the government? There is only one race, the human race. And I've heard all kinds of stories from people about what black people have versus white people versus red people versus yellow versus brown people, that there are actually certain strengths or weaknesses that they have. And that just is not true. There are certain things that we all get from our ancestors, but what we all get is still 87% of the same things. So yeah, Johnny Mathis is a great singer, but so was Frank Sinatra, you know? So look, that is a critical thing in America. In America, over 40 years after I dated my first girlfriend, who was an African-American beauty named Joy, 40 years later, when we're having race riots, it's just inexcusable. And what we have to do is we have to literally tell the people of the world in a UN special session that we, the new United States of America, are declaring that the idea of race was and is a fallacy. It does not exist.
Well, that is a beautiful note on which to end this wonderful conversation, interview, declaration, and clarification. And we certainly want to thank you, Andy, and we want to honor you, your work, your career, your being, and we look forward to as we said, walking with you into the new United States of America, into the new earth. And we look forward to your returning to our airwaves again as events develop. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alfred. I wish you the best.
Good enough. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.